So again, this is going to be your SSR ticket for this year on NA. You guys could see not only this time do we have all the permanent units, again, I covered all of that in my old video, but we also have new story locks added. So it's not got limiteds, so you can't hope for anything like that, but this ticket can change who you roll for. And so I'm going to go through every single one of these units with you guys, talk about not only how they are on a one-on-one basis, but also how they are performing currently on JP, looking ahead, trying to look at the new metas that are going to be coming out, especially with Koyan Sky and Oberon coming around that time for NA, and talk about, you know, how to get the most out of them and whether or not I think they're a good pick for you right now. And there's going to be some interesting shakeups here, because for my old video, there are some units that I can already spy on this list that I maybe wouldn't have suggested that now I would. And similarly, in the next 6 months between recording this here in January and again this coming out on NA permanently, there can be some changes, but we're going to go ahead and get ahead of this so that you guys have times that you can do something about it. So let's go ahead and start off the list here with the Sabers. So right off the bat here, we've got Altera, and Altera is an interesting unit where honestly for years I would say that she underperformed. She was always a good crit unit. She definitely had decent stats, but I think the issue that everyone looked at her was she didn't have a damage niche and she didn't really have charge. So a lot of people tended to undervalue her. A lot of people looked at her mats and said, ooh, wow, I don't want to have to deal with all those evil bones and stuff like that. But honestly, years and years and years of Delightworks and now a single giving her upgrades has led her to be a little bit of a monster, because they tried to give her every upgrade without giving her charge, the one thing that she actually kind of needed. As a result, they finally end up giving her charge, and you get into the Koyanskaya system, and all of a sudden you look at her kit and everything is on this like 6 turn or lower cooldown and can be doubled up. So it's not just getting a buff for 3 turns in a Koyanskaya setup, it's getting it twice. That's what's going to make Altera your strongest AoE saber at this current moment on JP. She has even surpassed Artoria in niche. Now here's the thing, she's going to be a 30% charger now as we move forward, and that is a nice thing, but if you want to get the most bang for your buck out of her, you're not just going to want Koyanskaya, you're also going to want Oberon with her. That's actually going to allow her to function from a starting point with a maxed out pin skill of a 50% charge CE. That'll allow her to 3-turn with one of those really powerful CEs like Aerial Drive, which you guys are going to get as a welfare CE later this year, or again, Cranking, which is going to be another welfare CE from the Bunyan event next year. Both of those are really strong, especially for buster units, and that's really going to help you in a lot of ways with Altera. And then you still have her 3 turns of attack up on the end of that. That's going to get her, again, another stackable buff. So by trying to avoid giving her charge and making everything 3 turns, and a lot of cases party wide, all of a sudden now you end up with a scenario where she's a little bit of a monster now that they have given her to charge and allowed her to work in that Koyanskaya system. They tried to prevent her from being a monster, and as a result they ended up making her one, because they finally caved and gave her the one thing she needed. So Altera can be probably your best choice for who to pick. The problem is, if you pick Altera, you are waiting until that buff over a year down the line here. So that's something to consider with this. If you pick Altera on the SSR ticket, you are waiting. Now, maybe you're watching this video after the fact. Maybe this is going to be a thing down the line on JP or even an A here where you've already encountered that buff, and as a result, she's going to work a lot better for you. But still, it's up to you. If you're in that gap period between her actual buff, you might want to go with another unit. We're gonna go to the next one, and again, chat's gonna immediately pop off here knowing that this is my waifu, but look, I'll always shoot you guys straight when it comes to bias on these units. I'm only gonna talk to you guys about gameplay, not about the waifu aspect of it. So the deal for Altera versus, say, Artoria is Artoria has that same sort of 30% charge capability, but Artoria's got a couple extra things under the hood, maybe not as much synergy, and that's why Altera has sort of been able to pop off harder in that Koyanskaya meta now, is because Artoria's skills are all really good, really low cooldown. They're all these 5-turn cooldowns. And again, to explain this, 5 turns is in a weird way really good in a Koyanskaya system, because in a lot of ways you end up in a scenario where you have a 3-turn buff, right? Well, if it's a 6-turn cooldown, which is kind of the minimum that you need to be able to repeat it in the Koyanskaya system, unless you're using Atlas Mystic Code. But if you're using a 6-turn cooldown skill, this means you can pop the skill on turn 1 and then nothing on turn 2, but then again on turn 3. So you get to double it up on turns 1 and 3. That's still really good. That's really nice. You get, again, the doubled up damage for turn 3 where you probably need it. So what about a 5-turn cooldown? With a 5-turn cooldown, you guys get to pop this skill on turn 1 and then again on turn 2. So you get back to back. You don't have to wait that turn in between. Or again, this could mean turn 2 and turn 3. Basically, it allows you to do it sequentially, those back-to-back turns. And that can be good in a scenario where maybe you go like, hey, maybe I need faster damage ramp up because turn 2 is really bad. In Artoria's case, you have a lot of skills like her, again, her Mana Burst, aka Dragon Core at this point, where it's only a 1-turn duration, unlike Altera's 3-turn. So why does the 5-turn cooldown benefit me here? It benefits you because instead of faster damage ramping, it means you get to pop it on turns 2 and 3. So maybe turn 2 is a really high health enemy. You get Dragon Core on turn 2 and turn 3 so that you get a better time dealing with that kind of annoying, pesky middle wave of a node. And then also, because of what Dragon Core is, it's going to change all of her cards to Buster. That could be really nice for you too. That's going to allow you to, again, be able to crit really hard or card really hard at minimum on that wave where you maybe otherwise wouldn't have the firepower to overcome it. So this actually helps in a lot of ways, and it is a little RNG dependent on the cards, but it helps Artoria pop off maybe a little bit, punch a little bit higher above the NP level that you might have of her. So it's one of the reasons I really like her. Again, Dragon Core has been a very well received buff at this point in time, and not only because it gives her 30% more MP damage, but because of that ability to change all of her cards to Buster. It gives you that triple Buster synergy in a lot of ways, or again, maybe even you just get the one card, but while you've got the 50% Buster up popped, that one card that's Buster is going to hit really hard. So it's making all of her cards actually synergistic, not only with her buff type that she's probably receiving from supports, but also just with her own steroid that she's going to be popping as part of her kit. So again, it's one of the reasons I really like her. Artoria is also another interesting one because of all these low cooldowns that she has in her deck that allow her to basically work without an Oberon. And we were just talking about kind of wanting that Oberon for Koyanskaya, or sorry, for Altera. You still might want one for Artoria because that's just going to help her hit even harder. That's what Oberon does. But you don't have to. You can actually use Artoria with just double Koyanskaya, and then if you start mixing in things like Atlas Academy, Mystic Code, you can actually make a lot of things work with even less charge than, you know, a full-on MLB K-scope or a K-scope with an append. So it's really, really nice. Also, don't forget the fact that Artoria actually has the 20% refund on the back of her NP. This is why I've called her for years a pseudo 50% charger. If we're comparing her to someone like Ibuki, she's not, because Ibuki gets that 50% all on one turn right up front. Artoria has to NP in order to get that charge back, which means she's only going to realize it in 2 turns of a 3-turn scenario. Basically, by turn 3, if you're killing the wave, that 20% refund there doesn't matter to you. But it's still really, really nice. This does help out, especially when you're trying to stretch any sort of charge scenario, which is what the whole Buster system is about. Buster is all about charge because refund doesn't work for it, really. So again, it's one of the really, really nice things about that. And it's one of the really nice things in general about a lot of the Artoria faces is that they have that on the back end of their MP. So Artoria is going to be one of the hardest hitting options you can get. She is going to be my current recommendation for anyone that wants to sort of have a good Saber now, in the moment. Not only as we talk with the SSR ticket coming out, but also, again, until Altera gets that buff, Artoria is just flat out, to me, the better option. even once Altera gets that buff, you're not going to regret having Saber. So it's up to you, and you can definitely choose whichever one of those you prefer. Next up on the list here, we've got Mordred, and this is another one where I think we might actually see, in this sort of gap period between me recording this and, you know, the actual ticket coming out on NA and becoming a permanent feature, you might actually see Mordred get a buff. And the reason I've talked about this is because Mordred's been a unit that's kind of been behind now for years. But the history here is that Mordred actually for a long time was considered by many to be the best AoE saber. She was the first one to really have charge, and Artoria getting the buff to her third skill finally actually helped her realize that potential and turn into a farming unit herself. Mordred had already been that. And I think the issues with Mordred isn't that her kit needs upgrades. In fact, if you look at her kit, largely she's got some really nice stuff, including critical star absorption of her buster cards and even cleanse with defense up for one turn of 50%. So that's not even talking about the farming applications. That's some really nice challenge stuff that I really like for Mordred. But I think a lot of people would look at Mordred's MP damage and go, hey, this isn't that good anymore. Yeah, with Oberon, we can definitely stretch that and it becomes a non-issue if you have higher MP levels, honestly. But I think looking towards the future with 90++ content and how hard some of that can be, we are starting to consider, hey, maybe I need a unit that punches hard. Now, where I think the buff is going to come, because Mordred has already had her MP interlude, is I actually think she might receive some attention to her mana burst. And that one of the ways they could do it without actually just naturally skyrocketing her damage would be to sort of give her the Arthur treatment. Those of you guys that are familiar with Arthur's mana burst, they made it 3 turns. Same thing you could do right here. If you give her a 3-turn 50% up, that's going to help her out a lot, because not only is she going to get that coverage for all 3 turns, and it's going to help her out on, again, like a pesky wave 2 or something like that, but it's also going to allow her to double it up since this skill is on a 5-turn cooldown. So this means pretty much you could activate it turn 1 and then also activate it turn 2. And so already by turn 2, not even in the final wave, you guys would have 100% buster up for that. And that, I think, would be another really, really nice thing for her. And so it would allow her to scale better in the scenario in which she actually has supports, and then just better all across the board on all turns without necessarily, like I said, skyrocketing her. So it would definitely bump her up, even though she would show low on just raw calculations without supports. But still, I really, really like that for her. I'd say out of these 3 right now, Mordred is the riskiest pick. She is definitely going to be the one that, to me, doesn't have the brightest upside as of right now in this recording. But still, you can definitely get good use out of her. And she's not a bad unit by any means, especially given the fact that she has that anti-Artoria niche on her NP. That will come in use at times, especially during scenarios in which maybe she might be a frequent appearance, like, say, Saber Wars or something like that. But again, I digress. I'm just going to say that you'll definitely encounter scenarios where a Saber face will be available for you to sort of bonk. But again, Mordred has been, at least for right now, historically the low man on the totem pole compared to these other 2. So I think the other 2 are a much better choice in the short term. Now, let's move on to the archers here. So as we start to talk about Arjuna, we got to consider the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room with regards to him is just going to be the fact that, honestly, Arjuna is not a bad archer by any means. He gets a lot of bad rap from people, but there's a reason for that. And the reason is that, and how I've always phrased it to people, is Arjuna is a good archer stuck in a class of monsters. He's just got such stiff competition from people that are frankly ridiculous, especially now Gil with his most recent upgrade that just came out on JP. So looking at Arjuna towards the future, this is maybe not the best of your picks. If you really like him, you can go for him. But honestly, they have addressed one of the worst parts of his kit, and that had to deal with his second skill. He was much maligned having the 25% charge here, especially now with the fact that a lot of these 30% chargers that are buster units, like we talked about, get real synergistic with that append being unlocked and maxed. He's at 25%, and you can't double it up, especially on a 10-turn cooldown like the skill was. So getting it to be useful was really rough in that sort of system. And it's why, like, if you really wanted to pop off with him, you often needed to be starting him at full charge on turn 1 with like a you know, K scope and an append or a super scope. But now they've sort of addressed this, and what they've done with it is they've given him charge per turn on top of that, so that now he gets that flat 10%. You don't even have to invest in the skill if you want it. So that is one of the nicer aspects to him. And the cooldown's also been lowered to 8, but it's still not going to be really usable unless you're going to be trying to do something like Atlas, and still, even then, probably not going to bother. I think the real use for Arjuna is, again, going to be if you just need a good high damage dealing archer. He definitely fills that role. His damage is not bad. The issue is sort of his clunkiness with those weird charge amounts, especially with charge per turn, because just like we were talking about with Artoria there with the refund after her NP, Arjuna is going to get 10% charge at the end of each turn. So this means that at the end of turn 1 he gets to realize it, at the end of turn 2 he gets to realize it, but in a 3-turn scenario, that third turn, that 10% charge that you're getting at the end of it, if you just killed the wave here, this is useless. So again, that's where it's like, hey, that's basically 20% extra charge, which as an aggregate source there means he turns into a 45% charger, which is still really weird. I still would vastly prefer if they would just go ahead and smooth out the charge, especially for Karna as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that is going to be the thing. The other issue that I think a lot of people look at here is his NP. He gets extra chance to instant kill divine enemies on top of just the normal instant kill chance that he has. Instant kill tends to be more of a meme for things. There are some units where honestly it's not, and they're actually really good farmers because of it. But in Arjuna's case, it's mostly still going to be a meme. Yes, the anti-divine could be a thing, but remember, you have a really hard time death procking any servant. So anti-divine would be primarily what you would use against servants, and that's really going to be his kryptonite there, is that it's not going to have an easy time death procking them. On top of that, he doesn't get more damage to divine, so it doesn't actually help him out in that grand scheme of things. So he does have good damage overall with his NP. The issue is it's just he doesn't really have a niche to play into, and his charge is kind of wonky. So definitely if you have him, don't not invest in him if you have no other good AoE archer, but he's probably not going to be the one that I would tell you guys to pick here. In fact, there's 2 others that are really good. Talking about the next one here, Artemis. Artemis is going to be our only single target, aka Orion, OG Orion. She's going to be our only single target archer on this list, and she's another unit that gets pretty maligned by a lot of people. I will say that, again, I think the criticism is at least somewhat fair, given the fact that, and we joke about this on stream all the time, that essentially your best single target archer out there is actually a Berserker. MHXA is really insane against Sabers, but the issue at play isn't so much that, because Orion does solid damage, especially against male Sabers. I think the issue is more that her kit is very weird. It's very one-turnish. There's not a lot of ways to help it out. You might look at the NP gain rate here and think, oh wow, she's got 1%. Surely that's really good. The reality is you start looking towards her arts cards here. She's only got 1 hit on the arts cards. That's why it's set so high. And then again, same thing with the NP. It's only the 5 hits, which can be something, but it's not really enough. And then the problem is a lot of people like to compare her to Urael, who ends up having, again, a 3-turn art steroid. She ends up having a drain that's also a charge. So she has a lot more capability of getting back to another NP that honestly Artemis doesn't really have. So I think that's one of the big issues. She is a still really solid unit for you if you need a single target archer. It's just going to be, are you facing males, and oh no, like, are you going to be able to get back to that second NP? You can definitely engineer it so that you can, but it's going to be a lot of brute forcing, just like you would be with a buster unit at that point, with just like forcing the charge into her rather than relying on natural refund like most arts units are used to. So I'm hoping that in the future they do actually give her a buff in that regard, and who knows, again, I might get proven wrong here in the next 6 months, but still, I hope to see some buff to her. But don't feel bad if you really want to take her because you just need a single target archer, but there are other good options that do come out, especially your welfare archers as well. Looking at the third one on the list here, Napoleon was definitely in an interesting place before Gil's buff, because Napoleon was actually, so assuming you were facing a divine servant, so both of their niches were active, Napoleon actually dealt more damage than Gil, because Napoleon was someone that, again, just had really good anti-divine damage. He's a 30% charger in that same sort of Buster Koyanskaya system, so you're going to want to unlock and max out that append for him, and he can do good work for you. But obviously, I think a lot of the discussion nowadays on JP is focusing way more on Ishtar and Gil, so a lot of people have kind of forgotten about Napoleon. But he's still a really solid unit, and honestly, I wouldn't overlook him. Just looking at his kit here, he does have the party-wide attack, and then again gets a further steroid for himself for 1 turn. I do wish that this were also 3 turn. That may be a sort of spot for improvement for him, because a little bit the issue at play here is you're sort of incentivized to pop this on turn 1, but in a lot of our farming scenarios, we really want sort of our most steroids, our most damage to come out on turn 3. That is typically where you're going to face the highest enemy in terms of health, and that's where you're going to need the most firepower. He's also got the 1 turn party wide tactics here. That's really, really nice and going to give him more NP damage, but you can still delay that one. And again, this is one that could be back-to-back popped in a Koyanskaya system with the 5 turn cooldown. So you don't got to worry too much about that, since that means you can pop it on turn again 2 and turn 3. You just got to be careful about how you use those Koyanskaya charge skills in order to make that happen. And then again, he's got, like I said, the 30% charge here, but he's also got invuln pierce, and that's a really nice thing to have because there's not a lot of other archers that have something like that. So I do really like that, but still, it's up to you to determine if you want Napoleon. I think a lot of people, especially having played through Lost Belt 2, really like him, and you can go after him if you want. And he is one of the better ones to pick here, and I'm going to say at this point, probably better than Arjuna for a lot of people. And then we get to Tesla, and man, Tesla has come a long way. Tesla is, to me, a difficult unit to acquire in a lot of ways, because most people don't really want to go after him as their chief archer. But where he's at now on JP, he is a solid 50% archer with 2 very wide damage niches that he can exploit. And then sort of the issues with Tesla were that he had some kind of RNG attached to his kit that is no longer really an issue thanks to the buffs. So I think as you start to look at him, you start to see like, holy crap, his galvanism has been buffed twice. And you guys can see why. He's got 50% NP gain. He's got the 40% debuff success rate. Again, 30% NP rate to the rest of the party, and then 20% buff success rate. And this last little part, that was the part that made all the difference for him and turned him from being a, hey, he's good, but annoyingly RNG, to, hey, he's just good now. And so as you start to look at him, you see natural born genius here. They already tried to address it once by giving him the attack of 3 turns here, so that even if his buff failed for the NP damage up, that he would still get something out of using this skill. But now that he's got that 20% buff success chance, that means that 80% is a guaranteed 100%. So it will happen as long as you pop the first skill first. And that does mean that as a result of that boom, there you go, you're guaranteed that extra 30% NP damage every single time on top of the 20% attack. So really, really nice. Now he's got 50% worth of steroids right there just off that skill to help him out. And he still has 50% charge here, as well as, again, 3 turns of invincibility. So this, to me, makes him the best choice. And part of the reason why is because not only does he kind of get that invincibility pierce like Napoleon has, but that 50% charge can be a little bit of an edge in a lot of scenarios. And what I mean by that is there are some scenarios where 50% and 30% are roughly equal in the Koyanskaya and Oberon meta, but there are scenarios where it is still an advantage, and one of those can be in events. So as you start thinking about a lot of events that give you a sort of welfare craft essence that gives you 30% charge, but then 50% when it's MLB, start thinking about those scenarios like lottos and stuff like that, where you go, oh man, maybe I don't have MLB of it yet, and maybe I've just got the 1 copy at 30%. Well, if you max out that character's append and they're a 50% charger, then that means you can work from turn 1 from that 30% charge. It's a little bit of an overlooked aspect to the 50% charges that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. A lot of people just kind of view 30% and 50% as the same in that system for starting out at a 50% charge CE, because there's not really a lot of good 30% CEs to work with. But that's not the focus there. The focus isn't that you need a good 30% CE. The focus is that you can start from 30% if you have a scuffed CE. And you don't want to find yourself into that scenario, but it's inevitable in some cases. So that is a really nice thing to have to his advantage. And again, just talking about, like I said, his noble phantasm here, he does have the extra damage to earth and sky attribute servant enemies, which is a really, really nice one to have. And that's why I said he's going to cover roughly half the servants in the game just right there off of that. So if you don't have Gil, it's not the end of the world. You can still pick up a Tesla here and do really, really solid damage. All right, so that was the archers, and now let's talk about our lancers here. So I think the elephant in the room when talking about lancers is naturally going to be Melisande at this point. She's going to be a unit that's going to be coming out later this year on NA, and pretty much by the time the ticket comes out, she will have already released. So that is going to be a big consideration for a lot of you. Some of you may be rolling her there. Some of you might be going, oh crap, there's just way too much that I have to roll this year, especially between the meta supports that are coming out this year. Maybe you're going to be rolling Morgan Le Fay or something like that instead. But a lot of you will be going, oh no, Melisand's going to be here and I'm just going to take her and I'm not going to worry about any of my other lancers. And that is definitely something you can do. But if you don't want to do that, if you want to get a lancer off the ticket, there's still some really good options here. And honestly, I think while as good as Melisande is, you can definitely get by in a lot of cases without having her. And I think our first two candidates on this list are really going to extol that to you. So again, this one's going to be another waifu of mine. A lot of people are going to know that, but I can safely say that I know so much about Artoria at this point that I know her in and out with regards especially to Melisande, because I've done a lot of comparisons, I've done a lot of analytical work and even some theory craft on her. And the one thing I can say about Artoria is I think you'll find at NP1 her damage can be a little lackluster. That is probably one of the first things that hits people in the face. It's not quite airish pre-buff NP1 bad, but it isn't great. And so a lot of people point to that as sort of a detraction against her, and they don't really look at the rest of the kit here. Part of what makes Artoria so strong is the 50% charge right off the bat. And we just got done talking about Tesla and how that can actually be a boon to her or to you. And again, looking at someone like Artoria, it doesn't stop there with her charge, because just like Artoria, she gets 20% on the back end. In fact, Artoria is so weird that if you were to combine her with double Koyanskaya and Oberon and an append, she has 330% charge potential in that comp, which you only need 300% to start from 0. So you would think that would allow her to start with a Black Grail. Sadly, and this is a weird issue that I've explained in another video talking about the Buster system back in the day, that you have this weird sort of concept of what I call block 50, and that's block 50% charge, one solid block that cannot be split up. Koyanskaya has it, Oberon has it, and Artoria has it. And as a result, even though you have 20% refund here on the back end of Artoria's NP, and even though Oberon himself has 20% charge in his kit, these 20% become really weird mixed with all those 50s, and you can't actually realize all of them as a result of that. And so you end up in a weird scenario where even though you have more than 300% charge, you can't start from Black Grail standpoint. Instead, you could actually start from, I believe it's a theoretical 10% charge with Artoria, but good luck finding a scenario where that's important. Again, just look towards maybe those 30% CEs where, hey, you know, maybe I don't have MLB of the 50% charge CE, but I can still start with this scenario because maybe we're in an event or something like that. So it can still be really useful to you. Honestly, one of the really strong aspects to Artoria too is just like with Melisande here, she's got, again, Invuln and Pierce in the kit. She's got it on her NP, and that's really nice because that means you don't have to worry about it wearing off. It's just always going to be on that NP when you need it to be. That is one of the really, really nice things I like about Artoria in that sense. Also, as of the time of the ticket, she's going to have the buff finally to her mana burst here that, while it doesn't outright increase her damage, it gives her 2 new 50% power mod damage niches against quite a bit of the game here with both chaotic and evil alignment. I think the issues concerning alignment power mods though is that they're not really going to apply to anything other than servants. It's very rare to see a non-servant enemy have an alignment. So it can happen in some select scenarios, but essentially it's basically going to be them. And so there are scenarios where it has come into play. I've seen people actually argue against this and say that it's almost never relevant. I've actually already seen it be relevant, and in fact, right after the buff, in the very first lotto that you guys get, there is a node that she actually pops off and due to that. So it's definitely something where I don't know why people say that, because I've already been able to utilize it several times on my own. It is a very nice buff for her. Sadly, I think a lot of people would argue she needed the NP interlude a little bit more, but we're going to hope that at some point in time she gets that. And who knows? Again, this could be another scenario where in the next 6 months on JP, between me recording this video and you getting that SSR ticket on NA, that buff might happen. So just keep that in mind. That could definitely be a thing. Another thing to point out here is again going to be her skill cooldowns, which are really, really nice here. All pretty low, except the third skill, which is 6 turns, but can still be doubled up. You still get that 50% charge coming back. Another overlooked aspect to her, because I've actually heard people say that she's kind of bad for challenge content, is the fact that her charge skill also cleanses her of debuffs. So that can actually be really nice if you've got something that's trying to hamper her or stop her in some way. Obviously it doesn't help if she's stunned or if she's skill sealed, but hey, for anything else, that's pretty much going to get her through it. So it's a really, really nice little extra thing that a lot of people don't talk about with her. And then she just has the static charisma that again can be doubled up for her. So honestly, Artoria is still a really good farming capable character. And about that NP1 issue with damage, unless we're talking 90++ content, a lot of the times NP1 with an Oberon just works. So you don't have to really care too much about, oh no, my unit maybe doesn't do that much damage, as long as you have the supports to actually work the unit properly. And then our next unit here is going to be Enkidu, and Enkidu just got a monster of a buff again on JP that just happened here. So a lot of people will talk to you about Enkidu's ability to solo things, and honestly, that's kind of always been there. And what I find to be really, really funny is not only is Enkidu probably the tankiest of all the SSR Lancers and just really good at challenge content. So looking at Enkidu's NP interlude here, again, I think what makes Enkidu so strong at this point is that this NP interlude was irregular when Enkidu got it. You basically get an extra 200% power mod here to threat to humanity enemies. And that's not that big of a deal, because while it is useful in certain scenarios, threat to humanity is not a very big niche at all. And it's basically relegated to certain story fights. But on top of that, Enkidu got just the standard NP damage interlude, which was nice for additional damage, plus that new niche. And then ends up getting an actual buff to the overcharge effect, which was already before the interlude 20% defense down, activating before the NP for 3 turns. It gets upgraded to 30%, which is a lot. That's 10% extra damage, and again, it's over 3 turns too. Now that made Enkidu really, really strong for one shots, on top of obviously solo potential and being tanky and all of that. But then now here currently on JP with basically New Year's rolling out and the Fate Strange fake sort of hype coming out, both Gil and Enkidu got buffs, and Enkidu got a buff to the 3rd skill here that was already one of the strongest heals in the game, that basically gave Enkidu 50% charge. And I think that was kind of why it was okay largely with Enkidu being both tanky and high damaging originally, is that Enkidu was still sort of stuck in this world where it's like, okay, but now they've come back and revisited the other single target Lancers and they've got charge. So while Enkidu is strong, Enkidu doesn't really have that capability of being like the farming potential unit and getting back to it. But now you do have this capability where you can 3-turn with an Enkidu, and Enkidu is just going to be a little bit crazy because of it. Obviously the skill's on a 10-turn cooldown, so you're not getting it back. But if you had to, you could still start Enkidu out again with something like a 100% charge, like via K-scope and again and a pen, or you can even start with 60% charge in the right scenario if you were to use Oberon and an append. But still, that would allow you to be able to squeeze out a little bit more damage potential and still be able to 3-turn with Enkidu. So I'm at this weird point where I think Enkidu is just the best single target Lancer in the game, and it's the dev's entire fault for making it that way. So if you don't have a good single target Lancer, Enkidu's still a really, really good one to get. The issue I think at play is if this SSR ticket is just coming out for you as of watching this video, that 50% buff is still a long way away, and Enkidu is still a good unit, but you do have units like Melisande that can loop as a single target. You do have units like Shisho and Brynhildr that can basically 3-turn already as what they do. So it is kind of interesting to then consider Enkidu as the choice. If you don't have a good single target though, Enkidu is definitely still a solid option. So don't let that distract you. But again, that's why, again, I'm going to say that both of these two are probably still good in spite of Melisande existing, but a lot of that depends on your perspective and whether or not you wish to roll Melisande. And I'm going to say if you're going to roll Melisande, probably Lancer is going to be a decent skip for you. But let's talk about the last two. Last two are not bad by any means, but they definitely have their share of issues at this point. So looking at Karna here, we just got done earlier talking about Arjuna, and Arjuna is weird, is the best way we could say it, right? Arjuna had that clunky 25% charge. Karna does too, and that is ultimately going to be one of the things that hold him back here. The way to think about it is, because this skill cannot be doubled up, because you can't get the skill twice on the same turn. You can double it up over 3 turns, right? But you can't get it twice in the same turn, which means that you can't pair that 25% with itself to make it a flat even number. So you can't get 50% charge out of this. If you could, that'd be great. And then all of a sudden Karna would be a nice, easy, like 3-turn capable servant with really good craft essences to support him. But because you don't have that, instead the way to think about this is start rounding the 25% down. And instead that functionally makes Karna a 20% charger. What you can do though is you could basically level up Karna's mana loading append to like rank 5, and then you'd get the 15% charge and have that round up with his 25% charge on turn 1. The issue at play then is if you were trying to still 3-turn with that and use, say, I don't know, Oberon on the back line, you would be 5% charge short unless you did something to remedy that somehow. So that's kind of why this is such a clunky thing. It basically means you're sort of relegating Karna to starting out with 100% charge via CEs and append combination, and then trying to basically pop these, you know, on the back end to do something about it. But unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that you can do. I think Karna is definitely not a bad unit, but he's that slight tweak away from being really amazing again. Karna for a long time was considered to be sort of the gold standard for your AoE Lancers, and it's only now with like loopers and different supports coming out that like the opinion of Karna has kind of changed. Everyone always kind of lamented that scuff charge, but people were like, you know, it's not that big of an issue. He still hits really hard. And that is the feather in Karna's cap still, is that he does still hit really hard. Again, he has had his NP interlude, and I think the only thing that a lot of people would compare him to and get annoyed by at this point with his NP is the fact that if you look at someone like Arjuna Alter, who also got Buster Resist down, Arjuna Alter gets it before damage. Karna has to have it after damage, and admittedly that might make Karna too strong if it were before damage, but I think the real issue is that charge as a result. But still, again, having a super effective modifier against divine enemies is always a nice thing to have. It's very rare to basically get a unit that can punch that hard, and that's what super effective does for you. It is a type of steroid that it multiplies with everything. There is no other way to get super effective, thus it is in its own category, and it multiplies against power mods, against card type ups, and against attack ups and defense downs. So it's probably the best buff you can have in your kit, and it's one of the things that makes NP's hit just very exceptionally hard. So he will absolutely be a divine slayer for you. He can still be good for you, especially if you like him. The issue is just going to be that until he gets some kind of attention now again, he's probably stuck in a little bit of a weird place, at least with regards to farming. As you start looking towards, again, like critting and challenging with him, he doesn't have a whole lot in the way of survivability, but he does still have some nice stuff in his kit to really help. So again, I do think Karna can be a solid unit for you. He's just a little bit behind the times at the moment. And then we get to Bradamante as our last option here. Now, A lot of people would look to Bradamante coming out here recently on JP and compare her with Bradamante, and it's somewhat of a fair comparison. I think a lot of people looked at Bradamante and were like, okay, you know, she's not the greatest looper, but she loops better than Bradamante. The funny part is I don't think a lot of those people have actually gone back and looked at Bradamante now that we have Summer Scotty and Oberon. His Bradamante can 3-turn. You can actually loop with her. I think the issue at play primarily with Bradamante overall now isn't that, you know, can she 3-turn? It's more damage output, and that's always sort of been one of the comparisons that we see with her, is that you start looking towards a lot of these sort of looper AoE SSR Lancers, and you start comparing them against their very good and popular 4-star equivalents. So a lot of people look at Bradamante and compare her, since she's AoE quick, against the Valkyries and against Parvati, and both of them are really nice. Both of them are permanent, as well as Bradamante, but the issue at play is it typically is easier to get more copies of a 4-star than it is a 5-star. Pity has kind of readjusted that at times, but we did just recently get the buff on JP that increased the rate at which 4-stars get rolled, kind of helping address that. So I don't know when A will get that buff, but that would be an interesting one to see. Still, though, I think Bradamante can certainly be a good, useful unit for you. She does have 3-turn steroids in her kit to help you out, and she is honestly a decent challenge unit. I think the issue is just, again, going to be a lot of people are going to be concerned with her damage output. Do keep in mind, though, that anytime you see NP damage in a servant's kit now, though, that is a nice benefit to them, because that means you can slap Oberon into that comp and basically make that damage boost there get doubled. So it's a really, really nice thing to have now for servants, and it's something that you should definitely pay attention to in Bradamante's case. I think a lot of people really want to look at Oberon as only a buster support, but the reality is if you take Oberon's 50% buster up out of his kit, Oberon is still the best neutral support in the entire game because of how much charge he gives, as well as how much damage he can provide to your nuker, who's going to handle things on all the waves, but especially on wave 3 with that doubling up of the NP damage. So I think people kind of get stuck in that mentality, but the reality is you can use Oberon in any comp, in any card type, and he's still going to do really solid work for you. So you don't have to view him as only buster only, and he can help out both your arts and your quick units. So again, I think Bradamante can still be a good serviceable unit for you if you really like her. If you really like her ass, that definitely works for you, and you can pick her right here. But like I said, Lancer's in a little bit of a weird spot at this point. Do keep in mind too, you guys are going to have welfares coming out over the course of the year that may or may not impact this. I'm going to try to mention them when possible, but still, it's definitely something to keep in mind. Next up is going to be our riders. Same thing with Bradamante, actually, ironically enough. You get Achilles here, and Achilles is another one of our permanent units that, especially for someone like me who's done a lot of guide work, who's really looked at Achilles refund numbers. Achilles refund is really weird, really fucky, and really annoying at times. That doesn't mean he's bad. In fact, Achilles actually has really good card performance and a really, really nice kit, so he's often been a really solid unit for people during challenge content, let alone farming. I think the issue has been when farming with him that his refund is a little bit low, but honestly, again, with the state of JP now, with the new quick support as well as Oberon, we don't care about that anymore, and instead it just comes down to, like, do you have enough damage? And he does. He's typically a really good unit, and like I said, that card performance is nice for him. The other good thing to keep in mind too is with a lot of your quick units, you're going to be dealing with a lot of stars, so critting won't be that hard of an issue. It's just going to be, again, do you actually get the refund amounts that you need? And that can be managed thanks to being able to brute force a lot of it now. But still, I really like Achilles. He's got 3-turn steroids. He's got crit damage up for 3 turns as well. And then again, he gets the self-survivability here with the invincibility for 2 attacks, 3 turns. That's part of what makes him strong in a challenge, as well as the defense up there and the fact that he gets taunt on this 3rd skill. So this especially is nice for not only, obviously, since this is both his charge and his NP gain skill, but this is nice not only for farming, but because of the taunt, it's also nice for challenge, because it means that, yeah, for that turn, he is going to get hit, and maybe you have the invuln active, so he doesn't even take damage. But that's just going to get you extra charge that could help him out in that regard. And it's another really, really nice thing, I think, to sort of have in his kit. It can be, like I said, weird. I think the what causes a lot of the weirdness in Achilles' generation is not only his base refund, but also the fact that the charge with the NP Jin is paired together, it makes for a really challenging and weird combo in a quick system. Ideally, you want to pop that turn 1, but Achilles' refund in the past wasn't so good that you could start him out not at 100% charge in a lot of scenarios. Now, with again appends and obviously the better supports, that is definitely possible. In fact, you can probably start him from 0 depending on the circumstances. So it's a lot nicer for him. It just really kind of depends on what you're trying to do. Then again, you look at his NP, he has had the interlude here. And again, it's quite nice because he also gets confusion there. And confusion can help you lock down even more enemies. Obviously, if you're just farming, you don't care. The last wave is dead and there's no consequence there. There's no recoil or sort of reaction from the enemy. But in a challenge scenario where you're dealing with break bars, where you're dealing with multiple waves of enemies and stuff like that, sometimes having these sorts of things can be really nice. It can just sort of debilitate the enemy or stop them from popping pesky dodges or invuln pierces or you name it, and can really make for a nice lockdown effect on the enemy. And then he actually has 2 overcharge effects, which again is one of the reasons his card performance is really nice here, because after he NPs, he gets crit damage up of 50% for 3 turns, in addition to that already 30% that he had from the first skill here. So I do think that Achilles can be a solid challenge unit for you guys down the stretch. Talking about Europa next, she's another interesting one. I think a lot of people have looked at Europa and said that by now she needs a buff. Honestly, on JP, I can kind of hear that argument at this point. Europa's still a really solid unit. The way I've likened her to people is I want you guys to imagine some sort of weird hybrid between Drake and Ryder Marie, because she has a lot of Ryder Marie's defensive capability, not quite as much, but what she sacrifices in that defensive capability, she picks up an offensive capability and charge. So that makes it really nice for her. She is a 30% charger as a buster unit. So again, you've got that synergy there with the 20% maxed out mana loading append, and you're definitely going to want like Koinskaya and Oberon to really help her pop off, because that's going to enable you to start from a 50% C to get even more damage out of her. I think that is one of the big issues that people have when they look at her, isn't her kit, it's her damage output, especially now considering Drake has gotten a buff on JP, who we'll be talking about here in a second. So I think looking at that, a lot of people go like, yeah, she could kind of use something at this point. And I do agree, but I don't know what they're going to do with her in that regard. I think, again, another thing to look at here is the fact that she gets 50% defense up during her NP. So if you manage to NP on a turn where you're going to get hit really hard by the enemy, she's going to be able to soak a lot of that damage, which makes it really nice for her. And she does still have, again, the survivability of invincibility for 3 attacks, as well as the 3-turn steroids. I think my issue at play here is that the 3-turn steroids are also combined with the charge skill. So this heavily influences you to popping at turn 1. And as a result, that really pushes you more towards that, hey, maybe I do want Oberon if I want to be able to work for her, because you don't get the append on turn 3, you only get it on turn 1. It means on turn 3, when you get the skill back, you've only got 30%, so you need to make up 70% charge there on turn 3, and the only unit in the game that's going to be able to do that for her is Oberon. So again, it's another reason to maybe go after him if you're trying to pick Europa up here with the ticket. But rest assured, her damage is not bad. The issue is more that her competitors are, again, going to maybe be outperforming her a little bit while still having more charge or maybe better parts that people prefer in their kit. So as we look at the next one here, Ozzy, and man, Ozzy might be one of the best picks you guys can actually take here. Logically, as we started to look towards the past here, units like Waver and Tamamo are going to naturally be mainstays, and we'll talk about them when we get to them. But Ozzy is a solid pickup at this point in time, because already on NA this year, he will be getting 2 buffs that really help him out, and we're going to take a look at that. Ozzy's always been a very widely desired unit, even though he's permanent, because of the fact that he is a rider with 20% party charge that also helps out buff success rate by 40%. He's a really nice unit for not only giving some love to the party, but also remedying those units that maybe have RNG skills that can fail on them, like Imperial Privilege and stuff like that. when you have an Ozzy in the party, that's no longer an issue because of that. I think the only issue here is that it's only 1 turn instead of 3 turns, so you kind of got to pick and choose when you use it, but it's still a really nice skill and a really good part of Ozzy's kit. And one of the reasons that for years, even though him and Ketz were kind of neck and neck, kind of gave him a little bit of an edge in that regard, because he did a little bit more for the party, in my opinion. But still, I think as you look at it, he's got Imperial Privilege, and with most units I would say, hey, this has got a great upside, but there's also the chance for failure that could really hurt your damage. We don't worry about that with Ozzy, because Ozzy again has that buff success chance of 40%, which is going to make this always trigger. So you've always got that 40% attack up that's going to make him strong. And then on top of that, he also gets the Charisma, which does get the buff that increases the party's attack, but then also increases crit stars per turn and crit damage when on sunlight battlefield. And you might be thinking, oh, okay, but Ozzy doesn't bring the sun. That's his issue then. Yeah, sure, if you're fighting in the desert with him, that'd be great, but while this is a nice flavor buff, it doesn't do much for him. And then JP went a little crazy as they give him an NP interlude that not only increased the amount of damage he did, but also added the ability to change the battlefield to sunlight for 5 turns, not even 3, and then also reduce his own skill cooldowns by 1. So Ozzy gets a little bit crazy here, not only for challenge, not only for support, but also just for damage and just sheer crit and carding capability. Remember, he's getting those stars per turn, and he's already a rider, so he's going to be naturally soaking those stars. So it's really a very synergistic, nice set of buffs that they gave him. And it's one of the reasons how they took a unit that frankly was already a really solid choice and just made it even more insane. So if you need a single target rider, he's definitely who you need to pick here. And honestly, he's basically going to be a super solid unit moving forward. Now, we're going to get to the next unit here, and I just mentioned her. Ketz here has basically had parity with Ozzy for years. Ketz had been a little bit more crit centric, a little bit more damage oriented, even though their NP damage was roughly neck and neck with Ozzy for years on end. And finally Ozzy's gotten some buffs. Now Ozzy got the first buff, but so did Ketz. Ketz finally got some attention there, and it did help because again it gave her a crit star bomb here that frankly was really nice in her kit, because not only did she have the targetable guts with buster up of 30%, but she also had again crit star absorption and crit star damage. Now again, I've talked about this before, that while the crit star absorption is nice, she is a rider and she's naturally going to soak a lot anyway, so she didn't need much in that capacity. So giving her a crit star bomb gave her the one missing piece that she needed. So that gave her the ability to soak the stars and generate her own there, as well as be able to crit even harder with the 50% crit up here. She does have the 30% charge, so again, you've got that 30% synergy as a buster unit where you're probably going to want it with the append. But still, that's going to make her a really solid unit. The issue is primarily that Ozzy has now had that NP interlude that she hasn't had yet. Now I say yet because I am honestly strongly predicting, not to spoil anyone on LB7, but I'm strongly predicting that Ketz in the next 6 months gets that NP interlude. I really think that's going to happen, and I think it's going to help her actually quite a bit. So she already deals damage and seals the enemy's NP for 1 turn, which is the same as Ozzy did. She inflicts burn, which is all right, not the biggest deal, but hey, that does mean you've got some just natural synergy right there with something like Honey Lake. If you wanted to use it on her, that's going to allow her to pop off a little bit harder. But I think she's going to get that NP interlude, and that's going to help bring her back in line with Ozzy a little bit in terms of damage performance. And I think she could definitely be a solid unit. So if you like Mucha Lucha, if you like your Quetzalcoatl, definitely go after her. I think she will be a good unit for you, and she's story locked unlike Ozzy, so she's a lot harder to get. But keep in mind, Ozzy's got that kind of buff success chance thing that may be a really valuable niche for you to fill in your account. It's up to you to determine if you want to pick one or the other. Now that would be still doing Medb a disservice. Medb is a very upgraded unit over the years. She has gotten a lot of love from the devs, and honestly, for a unit that's still really clunky, I still feel like Medb hits extremely hard and is really good at what she does, and that is killing males. And you might be thinking, okay, but you know, do I really need a male killer? Well, I'd counter you with start thinking about all the casters that you fight and start realizing that the vast majority of them are males. You end up fighting a shit ton of male casters. Now, yeah, casters typically aren't the hardest thing in the world to kill, but that's just right in Mave's damage niche, and it means that she can do a lot at even an NP1 for you. She's going to basically be able to pop off. She does get the charge per turn. She does get an extra charge on male or fey allies, which again is not something that she is as of this moment. We'll see maybe down the line where that'll come into play, but it is what it is. So I do really like this though for her, mostly from the standpoint that this can be used to basically help support the rest of the party, not just herself. This allows her to function in scenarios where I like to call them dual DPS scenarios, where you have, again, your two supports, right? So support 1 and support 2, and maybe they are in your back, maybe one of them's in your back line getting rotated with a plug suit. And then on your front line, you've still got the one support, but you've also got 2 other supports here kind of doing the work. Maybe one of them's AoE handling 2 of the waves, maybe one of them's single target handling the, you know, sort of awkward middle wave with a high health enemy. This is where this sort of thing is perfect, because Mabe can not only charge herself, but she can also charge her allies in the result of that, allowing her to basically, if that other damage dealer would be a male, charge him, let him get maybe overflow charge from some of the other supports, and then still be able to handle things. So I think that buff, while a lot of people didn't heap a lot of praise on it, actually does help in a lot of ways, especially in terms of her overall usefulness. And again, she still has the extra male attack, which is obviously a nice thing. This means that not only is she going to be a sort of steroid provider to the party, but she's also going to be someone that's going to allow even more in the case of males. And then still Siren Song, which honestly, I think the biggest thing that I hate is that it's male only and still can fail. But hey, it's a 30% defense down for 1 turn, so that does help out her damage. And then you still get to the NP, which has had its NP interlude, where she again deals extra damage to male enemies. And like I said, that's just her niche right there, where she's got the super effective modifier. And like I said, you guys know already, based off earlier in the video, this is how she scales so well. Just because Ozzy and Ketz have really good upsides and high potential, if you like Mabe, don't feel bad about it. She can still do really solid work for you. A little bit awkward with the charge per turn, but it is what it is. Then we get the last one, Drake. Now, if I'm going to pick an AoE rider out of this, Drake is going to be the one that I'm going to pick. But before we mention Drake, I should definitely mention the fact that there is one other AoE rider you'll probably all get this year, and that's Habitrot. And I'm not going to go too much into her, just so much as to say that for a welfare unit, yeah, you've got to clear LB6 in order to get her, but damn, she is strong. And she is really good as both a looper and a unit that can function as a sort of party rotation person, kind of like a Rash, kind of like Qin Gong. That's partially what makes her so good. Her damage is solid for a welfare unit. She can loop. She's got 80% charge in her kit as an AoE Arts Rider. So if that sounds good to you, maybe consider your options when picking here, because that is going to be a unit that you guys can all get at NP5. But let's talk about Drake. One of the things I really like about Drake is the fact that Drake is a very adaptable unit. I think you don't really see too many people using Drake nowadays, and that is not a sign that Drake is bad. That is more of a sign that people use the crud out of her, and thus a lot of people have her at Bond 10 already. So you don't see her getting used too often, as people have maybe started using other units, trying to work on them instead. Again, though, I cannot extol her virtues enough, because she has really good card performance. She has Invuln Pierce and 50% charge in her kit, which alone right there makes her valuable, especially as a rider going up against maybe some pesky, I don't know, Merlin or something like that, where maybe they've got Invuln as a caster. And then still, her second skill is the one that's getting the buff this year. It's going to happen, I believe, either at anniversary or shortly before summer. But it gives her an additional 20% buster up, and it's on a 6-turn cooldown. So we're talking Koyan Sky system. Congratulations, you can double the skill up now. So it's not only 20% that they added to her, it's 40% in the right set of circumstances, which is nice. And that's one of the things I really like. On top of that, they gave her defense pierce on top of her invuln pierce. So you're not going to basically reduce Drake's damage. You're not going to stop her from dealing damage. I really, really like that for her. I think that's something that's really solid. And this is why a lot of people have pointed to Europa and been like, wow, she kind of needs something now, because Europa does less charge and doesn't have all of these nice little extra bells and whistles in the kit. And all of this is on top of a 45% MP gain rate if she does happen to card. That's why I said her card performance is actually really nutty. As far as riders go, she's got an absolutely stellar quick card for generating stars. And because she's a rider, she's gonna soak them. So I think even in scenarios where you're carding with her, she's strong. There's also Voyager of the Storm, which doesn't have to be used if you don't want to on the turn that you're NPing. You might be able to use this in a way in which, like, maybe you're multi-NPing. Maybe it's both Drake and someone else NPing on the same turn. That can help the party then as a result. Or maybe Drake doesn't need it for you, so you carry this to the wave that the other unit does need it, and you pop it then. And that's one of the reasons I like Voyager, is even though it's one turn, you still get that party NP damage and party attack, which don't care what card type you are. It's just added damage for your NP. And it's really, really nice to have, in my opinion, for her. And then we look at her NP, and again, she's had the standard NP interlude, nothing really to write home about so much as she gets the crit star bomb here at the end. So like I said, you've got that further rider critting synergy. She doesn't really have the crit damage in the kit, but she doesn't really need it because, again, she just naturally has a good card performance. Yeah, it could be something that could be valuable to her, but you've also got a lot coming in the way of supports that are really just going to help her hit hard in the first place. So I think Drake has been one of those sort of like all-time units that's been good and has never been bad. But now that you get into the Skya and Oberon system, she gets even dumber. She gets even good, even more good with that, again, ability to charge 50%, but then the ability to double all this up while still actually having proper buster synergistic supports. Okay, let's tackle the casters now. The casters are a hard one, mostly because I get a lot of questions on these. Now, I'm going to say this sort of from a top-down analytical standpoint. Most of you should come into this from a standpoint of diagnosing the SSR ticket from like, hey, do I need supports first? If you're a newer player, supports are some of the best things you can take for your account. I often tell people it's like there's no such thing as a must-roll unit in the game, but some of these like meta supports are the closest thing you've got to that. And it's not that you have to roll them. It's not that you can't play the game without them. It's that having them makes you have more fun. It makes the game more efficient for you. It makes it take less time. It just makes your life easier in a lot of ways. So I definitely recommend these to you. From there, I think a lot of people have a hard time getting their hands on a single target caster. And that's where looking at someone like Sanzang is going to be definitely a consideration here. Yes, there is going to be a very good 4-star in Charlotte Corday coming this year. Yes, Ilya is going to get a 50% charge buff, but she's limited. You're not going to be able to pick her up here with this ticket. So depending on what your role plans are, Sanzang might look really attractive to you, and she's not a bad unit. She's actually going to get a buff this year. And then we have the AoE casters, and we're going to start out by talking about them first here, but I think they're sort of the odd man out as well. Yes, they're not bad. Neither of these are going to be where I would focus unless I just desperately needed an AoE caster. So looking at Anastasia here, I think the biggest thing that a lot of people would say about her is she's not bad. She actually can loop pretty well. She does have Invuln Pierce in her kit. She is a 50% charger. I think the issue at play is that she doesn't have her NP interlude, and after years and years and years of being out already, and actually several interludes, she hasn't gotten any upgrades. And a lot of people point to that as she's kind of low in damage and lagging behind some of her contemporaries, including 4-stars like Helena Caster. Again, a unit that you guys can actually pick if you're starting the game with your initial roll. You guys can try to like re-roll until you get a Helena Caster, and she's a really solid unit for you who's going to become a 50% charger herself. So I think as you look towards someone like Anastasia, yeah, she's not bad. She can loop, definitely loop better than a unit like Helena, but the damage comparison is where a lot of this falls apart. I do really like her though overall. She's got the skill seal on the back of the NP here, and again, still got the Invuln Pierce like we talked about, but the 1-turn steroid can hurt her a little bit. Even though it's 50%, it's very, very strong, but this does make her a little bit anemic. on the other waves, and you might actually find that in some scenarios you need to pop this on turn 2 so that she has enough refund to get to turn 3, which is suboptimal in her case because you really want damage for turn 3 in a lot of those scenarios. So you gotta hope then that she didn't need that steroid in order to overcome turn 3, which probably won't be an issue if you have a high NP level, but will be if you don't. Again, looking at her second skill here, she gets the party attack for 3 turns while also reducing enemy attack for 3 turns. And that's, you're getting a 40% swing here. And I think the thing to take away for Anastasia, she does have some of these challenge aspects in her kit, especially as you look to the third skill where it's not just a 50% charge, but it also has the ability to stun an enemy. Sadly, it's only a 60% chance, and honestly, even if it were 100%, it could still get resisted depending on an enemy's magic resistance. But still, this is definitely a nice kit for sort of debilitating and locking down your enemies at times. It's not necessarily going to make the world of difference, but it might save your life if you're really pushed up to the limit. So I do still like Anastasia. I do think she's a very, very capable unit, but she definitely needs that attention in the damage department soon. It's been a long time. It will happen eventually, I can guarantee it, but I don't know how long it'll be until she does. It's probably going to be something story relevant if they actually decide to bring her back. Maybe it'll happen in the next 6 months. Maybe it won't. We'll just have to wait and see. As we move on to a unit like Scheherazade, I think Scheherazade's a unit that's caught a lot of flack over the years. We've often talked about her in sort of hushed tones as people have not really liked her sort of introduction in Agartha. I'm gonna say give her a pass in that regard because again, that's the story version, the antagonistic version of the servant, so don't hold all of that against her. And actually she has a really good redemption arc if you've ever played any of her interludes, so I highly recommend looking into that. If you're someone that really hates her, you might actually find that you soften a bit if you play some of that stuff. But let's not talk about that, and let's actually talk about what Scheherazade can do for you gameplay wise, because I think a lot of people don't realize that Scheherazade can be a Black Grail looper. Scheherazade can start from 0%. Yes, that's going to require like 3 enemy waves and stuff like that, but she is not bad. She has come a long way, especially in terms of her buffs. So as you look at her first skill here gets upgraded to Arabian Night Storyteller EX, and basically gains the 30% charge now. So again, you got a little bit of synergy there with a 20% depend if you wanted to pop this turn 1, but that's up to you because again, you've got the 1-turn art steroid here. You might need it for refund on a turn 2, you might need it on a turn 1, you might need it on a turn 3. It's just again up to you to determine where to use that, and it might differ depending on what you're facing. Her second skill here is still the charm all male enemies. It's not that good, honestly. This is probably her weakest skill, but can still definitely be nice in a challenge scenario, especially with that defense there being strong. But then her third skill's also gotten another buff here that basically is going to give party-wide guts. This is another nice challenge scenario. And I think a lot of the issue with her is that people don't look at a unit's whole kit. They end up sort of just thinking about only ever farming, only ever the meta, and they just end up not realizing how a unit can be used effectively. But even then, I'd say a lot of people have already written off Scheherazade. They'd look at the NP gain stat and they'd be like, that's not that good, but they wouldn't think about the fact that she's an arts unit with 30% charge, with an arts up, and again, still has this capability of basically looping due to the fact that she has a 5-hit NP. So not only that, she gets an NP interlude at this point, and you guys can see she doesn't just get a typical super effective modifier of 150%. She gets 200%. And that's rare. Again, you guys saw this earlier in the video where I was talking about Enkidu, but most of your super effective modifiers are only 150%. So to have this is really, really nice. She does get the NP damage that again could scale with someone like Oberon, activating first, then deals damage to all enemies, and then has a chance to reduce their debuff resistance by 50% for one time. So if she's going up against the same enemies over and over and over again, she's really nice. And due to that party-wide guts protection, she can also help keep the party alive in a challenge scenario. So like I said, I actually really like her if you maybe don't have other better options. If you maybe have sort of the makings of an arts comp, you can still do good solid work with Scheherazade, and I think she can be a decent unit for you. Now, again though, this is all going to depend on, do you want to pick AoE casters with the ticket? Let's talk about Sanzang now as a single target caster. Honestly, for years and years and years, I was someone that sort of promoted Sanzang over even someone like Ilya. Not because I hated Ilya or anything like that, but because to me, a unit that has 80% charge is super valuable. There are infinite amount of scenarios that I can imagine where, hey, having more charge is better than not having any. And so as a result, yeah, her damage wasn't always the greatest, but she definitely had a nice kit, not only just for herself, but also to help the party. You guys can see she has the sneaky, actually, 3 arts card deck here, which is irregular for a buster unit, but there are some original units that have it. Her NP gain rate is also not bad to begin with, but then as we start to look at this, again, you've got the 80% charge here, and it's also going to be a 20% steroid for her NP damage. But she also gets the second skill here that gets the upgrade. This is a taunt, kind of like we were talking about with Achilles, where, hey, I'm going to be able to soak all the hits to myself. And as long as I'm confident that I'm not going to die, which again, she does have damage cut here to reduce damage coming into her. But as long as you're confident you're not going to die, why not do it, right? Like, it's just even more NP gain for you if you're not wiping the wave, or you just broke the break bar, and thus you have enemies that are actually going to get a turn against you. But then this gets upgraded, and this is going to happen at, I believe, the Super Camelot Grail front that's going to happen sort of in the first half of this year. I think it's sometime around May, if I remember correctly. But this is going to give her a party-wide sort of charisma of 20% for 3 turns. This is, again, not just nice for herself, but also the fact that you might be allowing somebody else to handle other waves, and then she handles that really high health assassin or berserker or something like that for you. So I really, really like this, because not only does this increase her damage, but it's also going to increase someone else's. And again, in a weird sort of Koyanskaya setup, you could double it up. I think the weirdest part about Koyanskaya with regards to Sanzang is the fact that this is 7 turns. This would require something like Atlas if you wanted to be able to get it back again. And then you're forgoing the sort of like plugged third support, which means you're probably not going to have enough refund. But then we get to her third skill here, and the third skill is Party NP Gen for 3 turns of 30%. That is nothing to sneeze at. That's actually a really, really nice skill, especially when you consider that with the second skill there, she is going to basically be, again, taking all the hits for herself. This means that, like, if she NPs into a Brave chain of, like, arts cards, she can actually get back to an NP, and it's kind of hilarious if she managed to soak some stars. She's also going to grant the party debuff immunity for 1 turn, and this is another really nice aspect of her kit, because it can be really useful against, I don't know, pesky bosses in Lost Belt 5 that are maybe assassins that may or may not actually debuff the crap out of you. But let's not talk about that for spoiler purposes. Instead, just focus on the fact that this is always a nice thing to have. Having this in your party is better than not in a challenge scenario, and I really, really like debuff immunity because of that. It just basically is going to invalidate any sort of nasty debuffs that the enemy can put on you to try and stop you. Then she's also had her NP interlude over the years that now ignores defense, which I'm going to say again, there's not too many assassins out there that are actually going to pop defense up on you. Most of the time they do stupid stuff like evade, which is really annoying, but still, this is definitely a nice thing to have. And then she also reduces her critical attack chance, which can be nice against, again, the sort of crit happy class that assassins are. It is a strong crit chance reduction too, which is basically going to make it so that that enemy will not crit that turn, unless there's some sort of like crazy ass sneaky assassin spriggan that has somehow managed to get 10 stacks of crit chance up on you. But still, otherwise, that is going to be a really, really powerful thing that's going to make the vast majority of enemies out there in the game not crit at all. So I do really, really like that for her. And that's one of the reasons why, even though her damage isn't the greatest, it is definitely not bad, especially nowadays, and will be a very, very solid unit that's synergistic with Buster for you as a single target caster. And unlike comparing her against, like, say, a welfare like Caster Shootin', she actually has charge to be able to deal with things, whereas Caster Shootin' definitely wishes she did at this point in time. And now let's talk about the elephants in the room, the, again, support casters. So the last SSR ticket that we did was a temporary one. I did the video for that as well. And again, it's one of my most watched ones on YouTube. But basically, A lot of people joke that that was the waiver ticket because it was everybody's first shot to guarantee that they finally got waiver. You might be new, so this might still be a valid option for you. A lot of the people that chose waiver last time do not need to choose waiver again. And frack, I think this is something that a lot of newer players get confused by. If you already have the support caster, you do not need a second copy of them. Trust me when I say this. Yes, there is benefit to having a second copy, but it pales in comparison to the benefit that you would gain from having another new unit. So definitely focus your attention on new stuff rather than stuff you already have if you're someone that's trying to make your account more robust and more balanced. But still, if you don't have waiver is an interesting unit. I think we just got done talking about Oberon earlier and how I said he's sort of the best neutral support in the game now once he comes out. And he will be out probably right after this ticket drops. The issue, I think, is not everyone is going to plan to roll on him, which, again, I'm going to say is definitely not the smartest move since he doesn't come back for a year and a half. But I am going to say that you don't necessarily have to use waiver anymore. There are other competitors like Oberon, but not just Oberon, also Reigns. So what makes waiver still good in this day and age, even though he's sort of been outclassed in a lot of ways? One, waiver doesn't care what card type you are. Waiver gives 50% charge to a single unit, but he also gives the party 20%. On top of that, waiver is permanent, and that's probably one of the best things we can say for him. He is general pool, he is always available, but maybe you don't get spooked by him. I see a lot of people talk about this in a sense that like, oh hey, I'm a whale, like a permanent unit, I'm gonna get him because I roll so much. Guys, if you're a free to play, you are not guaranteed to get a permanent unit. You just don't roll that often to guarantee that you will see them. In fact, even as a whale, I will tell you right now that across both servers, me playing both NA and JP, I have never been spooked by Tamamo or Jack. Both the copies that I have of those units, and in fact on JP and NA having Tamamo on both, I have had to roll for. I have never gotten them otherwise. So take that as a lesson for someone that rolls a lot, that you still might not see a unit ever come to your Chaldea if you're just trying to be patient and wait. Sometimes it's better to take the gift that is given to you without looking it in the mouth. Taking waiver here and now assures that you will have a good charge support that will be useful to you. Yes, you might get better ones in the future that maybe make it so that you don't use waiver all that often anymore, but I'm still going to say that in the short term, waiver is extremely valuable to any account. In fact, most masters out there can tell you that their account changed the second they got waiver. It's only been more recent masters that have come on in the onset of the Castoria era that have started to be like, you know, I don't really care that much. Reigns is now a 50% charger. Castoria herself is a 50% charger. They're all really good. Getting the waiver didn't change that much for me. But still, if you don't have those other units, waiver is still extremely valuable to you. So let's look at what he does. Again, you guys can look, and he actually did have an old set of skills. Don't look at those. They're not in effect anymore, and they were extremely bad. Again, he's got 30% targeted charge with 50% crit damage for 3 turns for one ally. That alone in and of itself is really solid. His second skill is party-wide defense and damage cut of 30% and 500 damage taken less. So that in and of itself is really strong, but keep in mind that this also has 10% charge for the party. So everyone, not just waiver, not just the target, it's the whole party that gets this. And then his third skill here is party attack for 3 turns by 30%. Party damage, this one's a little bit misconstrued one. It's just flat damage. So if you have an attack that deals 10,000 damage, this will make it 10,500. That's it. That's all it does. It does not multiply. It does not add to anything. So, well, it does add, but it doesn't multiply. So again, it's just a nice little flat damage added. It's definitely better than not having it, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. But again, this is also going to increase the party's gauge by 10%. Now, a lot of people will just sort of look at a top-down waiver from this, and they're not going to consider some of the other applications of waiver, which is that waiver is really good defensively for keeping the party protected, as well as for stalling out enemies. You guys can actually see his NP reduces all enemies NP gauge by 1 turn, which makes him valuable in stall comps, on top of the fact that he has that party-wide defense. It's also going to curse the enemies for 6 turns, and has a 150% chance to reduce their defense for 3 turns, and that's what scales with the copies of him, since he's not a damage dealing noble phantasm unit. Instead, when you get additional copies of Waver, it increases the amount of defense down that he's going to do to the enemies. And again, this is where I say, like, there is value to having more copies of him. It's just not the biggest thing in the world because you're not always going to be using his NP, but it is still a very, very nice thing that he can do this. And then obviously he's got the chance to stun them for 1 turn. It's only 50%, but you'd be surprised how often this can land, especially in save your bacon in a clutch situation. So I do really, really like Waver. I think Waver still has a lot of uses in stall comps, and while he isn't the most meta unit anymore, I think what makes him still truly have value is the fact that he's permanent and he is on this ticket. So you guys can take him. If you're a new player just looking to start out FGO, this is one of the best units you can take. And so I would honestly say he might be the best unit you could pick, short of, man, there's just like my favorite waifu or husbando that has gotten me into playing the game. Sure, if that's the case, if they're on this ticket, take them. But if not, and you don't have a Waver, you really should consider taking a Waver. He is one of the best things that you can pick, especially just for having that early meta 50% support charger. That is something that I think cannot be expressed enough, because those units absolutely can make or break your account over time. And then we get to the last unit here, Tamamo no Mai. And sorry, Tamamo no Mae. Tamamo's been a contentious unit over the years. Not that people hate her or anything like that. Rather, it's quite the reverse. A lot of people really like her and they want her to be better. Tamamo is not a bad unit. Let me express that thoroughly. Tamamo is one of the best supports still for challenge content. Yes, you do have crazy units like Merlin or Proto Merlin or Castoria. And I think when Castoria came out, a lot of people started saying, oh, Tamamo is dead. Those people couldn't be more wrong. And in fact, I pointed out that Castoria's biggest weakness is the lack of healing in her kit. Something that Tamamo not only provides, but then synergistically works with Castoria's kit for getting back on the cooldowns, lowering those cooldowns and getting back to more charge and more sort of damage and refund potential from Castoria. So I think a lot of people were sort of very preemptive on that. They didn't really realize that Tamamo actually still had uses and was still really good. And that's typically what happens whenever we get a new powerful unit, especially one that maybe moves the bar a little bit. You get people that knee-jerk react all the time. So don't let anyone tell you that Tamamo's bad by any means. In fact, as you look at her kit here, she has the ability to drain a single enemy of their charge. So remember how we were just talking about Waver and stall comps? Stall comps are primarily designed to not allow the enemy unit to get to its noble phantasm, because if it doesn't get to its noble phantasm, it can't murder you. And, well, I mean, it could if it can crit you, but let's not get into that. Still, this is going to design around not allowing the enemy unit to get there. This is really nice, but then because of the response to people saying, even before Castoria came out, that Tamamo maybe needed more damage, what you see here is that they actually give Tamamo a party-wide NP damage up, except for herself, because she doesn't need it or gain any benefit from it, for 3 turns. So everybody in the party besides Tamamo gets 30% NP damage up for 3 turns. Really, really nice skill there. And it's always on a low cooldown with her, which I really like. Her second skill here is Shapeshift, which is basically just more defense for 1 turn, and then further increase his own defense by, and again, an additional up to 30% for 3 turns. So this can be on 1 turn, 60% defense, and then for the next 2 turns after that first turn, 30% defense. It's a really, really strong defensive skill that just means that Tamamo's not going to get her shit kicked in really fast. She's going to be rather sort of tanky, at least as far as casters go, especially because a lot of like support casters, there are fights that like the AI actually focuses on support casters. Tamamo at least is going to be able to take some of that punishment. You're still not going to want her to get hit too much, but she's still going to be able to take some of it. That as well on a 5-turn cooldown. Then we get to Fox's Wedding here. Also on a 5-turn cooldown, and you'll see why I'm emphasizing the cooldowns here in a second. She's going to increase one target's arts performance for 3 turns by up to 50%. So it's a strong steroid for 3 turns. Then it's also going to heal them, so just a spot heal of 2500 HP here. The reason why we care about the cooldowns in the Tamamo system is because just like in the Koyanskaya system, in fact, we could say Koyanskaya is derivative of Tamamo. This is where Koyanskaya's system comes from. Tamamo's NP reduces the party's cooldowns by 1 turn. And as you get into these sort of triple arts synergistic combos, you're able to combine a lot of the card types with themselves in order to get triple arts, get party-wide charge, get to an NP again and again and again and again. You keep rapid firing those NPs. And all of that is while you're also stalling the enemy, draining them, making them not able to get to their noble phantasm. And then you're still reducing your skill cooldowns to get them back. In Tamamo's case, she's got another support MP kind of like Waivers, but she gets the ability to reduce the party skill cooldown and then also heal the party. And the healing is what's going to scale with MP copies. This is one of the reasons why when I got spooked by Waiver the other day, I already had more than 5 copies of Waiver, so I was annoyed by that. And someone in chat said, oh, well, you know, it could have been worse. You could have gotten a Tamamo. And I said, no. I don't have NP5 Tamamo. I would have loved getting another Tamamo instead. So that would have actually been better for me. But maybe you're someone that has a lot of copies and maybe you don't care. Again, remember, you don't have to have more of these units. More does help, but it's not the most essential thing. But still, it is going to be more healing from her NP if you do have more copies. So that is nice in her case. And then on top of that, on the back end, and this is her overcharge effect. So again, this is the thing if you have more ranks of overcharge, if you put her later in an NP sequence, or again, you just get her to like 200% charge or something like that instead of just 100% like typical. This is what's going to scale up with that. It's her ability to charge the party's NP gauge after her NP. This is why in a lot of scenarios where you see like a triple arts setup, and you see people popping NP after NP after NP, a lot of the times they end up putting Tamamo last because Tamamo is going to give flat refunds. So you want the other people to have already used their noble phantasms so that this helps them get back to another one. And that's partially what makes it so strong. She's reducing cooldowns and charging you on the back end of that NP. What she doesn't have charge on like command on demand via skills, like something like Castoria does. But what she does do is she charges on the back end of the NP and sort of reduce those cooldowns. So that's going to help someone else like a Castoria get back to those skills that help charge. But it's also going to help them get back to their NP that can protect the party, or again, can maybe help your damage dealer fire off their NP to basically go on the offensive. So it's really, really a nice setup here with Tamamo. And honestly, I think long term, as we look forward towards the future, I think Tamamo has, at least for the more veteran accounts, more staying power compared to Waiver. So Tamamo might be someone that I might extol a little bit more and might emphasize a little bit more if you don't have her. Don't listen to the people saying Tamamo's dead. They're dumb. Instead, start looking at the aspects here that can really benefit your account in challenge scenarios, because that is where Tamamo thrives. She doesn't have that hard defense, but you can easily get that from another support. And instead, she is very complementary with those other supports for allowing them to pop off or allowing your damage dealer to. I highly recommend considering Tamamo in this ticket. She is, just like Waiver, absolutely one of the best things you can pick here. Definitely give her consideration if you don't have her. And again, maybe if you do, hey, that NP2 could still help out. Maybe getting that higher MP level there, basically getting extra healing. All right, now with that being said about the casters, let's finally get on to the assassins. Now, I think assassins are a little bit of a weird choice here for us. Honestly, it's not that any of these units are that bad. It's more that like there's so many other good options on the SSR ticket. But if you need a single target assassin, you still have 2 really good options here. I think the weird one, the odd man out here, is going to be Osakabehime. And that's because Osakabehime has been not tended to that well over time. There's going to be a lot of people that'll tell you that Osakabehime is not a bad unit and that you can get some usefulness out of her. And that is true, but I do not put her nearly in the threshold as other supports like Tamamo and like Waiver. And I think this largely has to do with how, again, the devs have sort of treated Osakabehime over time. A lot of this is due to the fact that frankly, Osakabehime got taken and pulled in two directions. They started trying to make her quick, and a lot of people said like, oh, is she supposed to be the savior of quick when she first comes out? And I don't think she ever was designed to be. I think she was designed to be more of a like karting and challenge unit. I think still though they kind of fail at that, and largely the only reason I still see some uses out of her is either for buff stripping memes or again going up against pesky rider bosses where maybe your support casters get their shit kicked in versus the assassin who actually counters it. So it still might not save you in the grand scheme of things, but it might help give you a little bit of an edge. Just talking about Osakabehime, she still has, again, the 30% defense up for herself, as well as sort of like with Tamamo there in her morph skill, she gets the 3 turns of additional defense up of an additional 30%, and then also gets debuff resistance of 40%, and then party crit damage of 50%. Osakabehime was actually one of the first units to get this, and I actually said like, hey, that's actually a good buff for her. What we then saw is after that fact, they gave that sort of singularity, that singular buff that only she really had, and they gave it to everybody else. Basically, it went to Boudica after that. I think it went to again Artoria after that, and then even then it still went on to even more units. So a lot of this was something that was unique to her ends up getting given away, and it's one of the better buffs that they actually ended up giving her. Her second skill is the ability to charge one ally's MP gauge by 20%. This is woefully bad. It's not that charge is ever a bad thing to have happen. It's that as a support, this is extremely anemic, especially if you just, you know, look right next door to the riders at someone like Ozzy that gives 20% to the entire party. This skill could definitely use an upgrade and is frankly just lackluster at this point. It's again 50% star gen for 3 turns for the target, but the fact that it's just one target, this skill could be a whole lot better than this in my opinion. So if I were going to upgrade anything on Osakabehime, this is probably where I would start. And then her third skill here is Castle Ghost A++. This one's actually a nice one. It's one enemy's defense for 1 turn. I wish this were 3 turns, but it is 40%, so it's strong. But it's also a entire buff strip. So that is, again, what I said before, like kind of one of the reasons people use her. Ironically, we're going to get to something here in a second where you're going to just be like, wait, yeah, no, okay, this isn't that big of a deal then. But let's talk about it as we move on down. So as you look to her NP, she's actually already gotten her NP interlude as well, and she gets party-wide defense by 20% for 3 turns. For starters, this is also not that good in the grand scheme of things. You see units rolling around with 50%, or even now you have units like Constantine that have 100% defense up. Units like Galatea that have 100% defense up. So the fact that you have a support that gives 20% for 3 turns, it's not bad that it's 3 turns. It's just the 20% needs to be a little bit more. She does, however, increase party's max HP for 3 turns, so she gets a little bit of that healing. And if you're unfamiliar with max HP as a concept, a lot of people finally learned about it with Proto Merlin, but max HP is a really nice thing to have. And actually Merlin has had it in his kit for a long time that people still didn't understand. What it does is it heals the target. However, unlike normal healing, max HP, if it hits your cap, it just goes over the cap. It just increases your HP to that new number. So you can't ever waste max HP. Whereas like if you're dealing with, say, I don't know, maybe you have 7,000 health out of 8,000 health and you get healed for 2,000, 1,000 of that would be wasted. But if it's 2,000 max HP up, then instead you just get healed to max and your HP increases to 9,000. So that's where max HP is actually somewhat useful, but sadly still this is not really enough. And I'm gonna say part of the issue is getting Osakabehime to her NP to make this healing really worth it. I think as you start looking over to like Tamamo, you're like, you know, the scaling isn't bad. She actually scales a little bit better. The issue at play here is that she doesn't have nearly the capability being a quick unit, because quick doesn't refund as good as arts, and she doesn't really have the charge built into her kit to really allow it. She's got 20% targeted, nothing really for herself unless she targets herself with that skill, which sort of defeats the point of using her as a support. And then her overcharge effect, and this actually, as you guys can see with the NP interlude, changed, and this is where I said she got pulled in 2 directions. She was quick up of 30% for 3 turns. Now again, this was not the strongest, but still not bad. But then they, instead of when giving her an NP interlude, instead of like increasing the healing or maybe giving her some sort of like Tamamo like after charge effect, instead they gave her party buster up as well. And now, well, yeah, we can sit here and look at Summer Scotty into the future to say, hey, look, we've got sort of quick and buster card synergy in the quick system now. This just felt like a really poor sellout. You had a unit that was designed to maybe help quick out a lot that was instead somehow now helping out buster. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still really good if you're a quick unit and you get a buster card to show up. The issue at play is, honestly, Osakabehime needs better applications to help her be more of a supportive character. And to me, well, yes, this does do that. This isn't the direction she needed to move, because there's plenty of other units out there in the game that give buster up that frankly I would rather take than an Osakabehime. So I don't think Osakabehime is bad. I think Osakabehime is this sort of odd support challenge unit that the devs don't really quite know what they want to do with her yet. And sadly, it's been this way for years. Who knows, maybe they will revisit her at some point and actually change that, but I still think that's a long time coming. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend picking her here because I think there are better supports you could otherwise choose. And again, even if you already have those other supports, there's still better other units that you could probably pick. Look at the next one here with Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper, I think, is another unit where a lot of people have looked at her over the years and said, hey, she's good, but she's kind of fallen behind in damage a little bit. Allow me to convince you otherwise. So for starters, just take a look at this triple quick deck here. That is 5 hits. That's a lot of star gen. In fact, Jack is still one of the best star generators in the game, despite being a first 4 months of the game released servant. So she is excellent in that regard, and you definitely don't have to worry too much about ability to generate Noble Phantasm with her or anything like that. Especially as you look at her NP gain rate, it's actually kind of nutty given her hit counts. But basically her first skill here is both her hard defensive skill, her evasion of 1 turn, as well as her steroid, her quick performance up of 1 turn of 50%. And where I've said that I actually think they could buff Jack would be to give her actually 3 turns of quick performance. You don't need to make her deal more damage. You just need this to be more consistent throughout several turns. That is one of the issues, as again, I've talked about having 1 turn steroids with 1 turn hard defense skills before, where you have to maybe sometimes make this hard choice between, do I do more damage and die later, or do I live but I do less damage? Sometimes there's no good answer, and so it often helps to actually have multiple turns on one of the effects. That way you're like, okay, I can use this when I need to and not die, but still have multiple turns to pop off, right? So that's where that sort of thing can happen. But let's talk about the second skill here, because as you guys can see, remember what we were talking about with Osakabehime? Yeah, Jack has this too. Everyone seems to forget that Jack has the ability to remove one enemy's buffs, and it's all their buffs. So it's the same thing as Osakabehime, but instead you have an actual offensive powerhouse here with Jack. This is why I'd rather take Jack in most of those cases. So again, she's going to be able to pop off. And then she's also going to reduce their critical attack chance for 3 turns by 30%, which is enough to significantly impair an enemy NPC's ability to crit you. Her third skill here, and a lot of people talk about this and say it's rather weak. This is a 2500 heal on a 4-turn cooldown. That's not bad. You just probably don't want to have to lower the skill if you don't have to. But still, even if you're to keep it at nice, 2100 on 5 turns, really low cooldown. That's still a decent amount of healing. Honestly, there's a lot of mystic codes out there that heal for around this amount. So I'd say people, while they would think this is weak, still the fact that you might be going multiple turns against someone, if you keep getting this skill back and you keep using it, it's a lot of effective health over time. It might not be the most in a pinch, but it is still, if you're using it proactively rather than waiting and going, oh shit, I'm within an inch of my life, you're going to get a lot of usefulness out of a skill like that. This is part of the reason why her star generation is so nutty. She's got presence concealment A+. But as we look at her NP here, she has had an NP interlude, but the interesting thing to look at is you guys can see where she started at 1200 base modifier here. But as she gets the interlude, she only goes to 1400 instead of 1600. She only gets half the amount that she was supposed to get. So Jack was originally scaling exactly like she should, but then when she gets the NP interlude, the standard was to increase her to 1600. She did not get that, and you can tell that because the basic rule of thumb is whenever you get an NP interlude, NP2 becomes NP1 and NP5 becomes NP2. So as you can see here, she was supposed to be 1600 when she got that interlude. She's not. So they tried to artificially keep Jack down. It's because I think, kind of like with Vlad later, they got really worried about overall damage performance with Jack, and I kind of understand why. So let's take a look here. So for starters, she ignores defense when dealing damage to the enemy. So even if she didn't manage to remove a defensive buff, maybe she manages to carve right through it. So that is still another additional effect that I don't hear a lot of people talk about with her, because the real big thing that a lot of people will talk about is the fact that Jack is anti-female. There are not a lot of anti-female units in the game. So the fact that there's so many female units, because this is a definitely thirst trap gotcha game that everyone's playing, this is a really, really nice wide open niche that you can have. I think the other thing here that a lot of people forget about this is this isn't super effective. And in a lot of ways, super effective is great. It would be absolutely phenomenal for her to be super effective, but she does get a little bit of a benefit here from being a 50% power mod instead. What's the difference between a super effective damage buff and a power mod? Super effective buffs only apply to the noble phantasm itself. That's it. Just that attack, just that noble phantasm itself will get the extra damage. No other additional cards will ever see the extra damage. Power mods, on the other hand, affect not only the noble phantasm, but anything else you do during their duration. So it activates first in its one turn, but it's 50% against females. This means that you often see a lot of like scenarios where you get triple quick. You get Jack's NP and then 2 more quick cards into her extra attack. And guess what? Both the quick cards and the extra attack all get that 50% power mod against females. That's one of the reasons Jack can really hit hard for you. If you're going up against females, it's not just the noble phantasm that's going to hit hard, it's also her cards for the duration of that turn. This is also why you see some really insane like crit scenarios where Jack basically refunds back to full again right after an NP, just based off of her card performance. She's really good at generating those stars, and she can go right into the NP having them. So I'd say, while yes, Jack has fallen a little bit behind in terms of raw damage potential, 1, her niche is a very good one to have, and 2, honestly, she's still really solid at what she does. So she doesn't really need that much attention. Even if she's not the best, she's still really, really good. And I would definitely recommend, if you need a single target assassin, examining Jack is one of the options for you. The other option here is going to be Mr. Li Shuwen, and he is a story locked unit, and he does have some nice aspects that maybe Jack doesn't have. But remember, Jack has that buff removal, so let's not go too much into that. But still, as you look here, I think the weirdest part is he's not a triple arts deck. The Buster definitely helps him hit hard, but I think for me, I would prefer it a little bit more, and you'll see why here in a second. Li Shuwen gets ignore invincibility for 1 turn. There you go. That compared against Jack, he's going to pierce any invuln, so you can't really stop him. However, Jack can just remove it, so it's probably not an issue unless you're in a challenge scenario where like you're going up against an enemy that has an unremovable buff. That sort of thing is designed to stop units like Jack, but I digress. So this could still be to his advantage. He also increases his own critical damage for 1 turn. Oh, that's nice. How much? 100%. Just like his Lancer counterpart, Li Shuwen is one of those units out there that is just a crit monster. 100% crit damage is one hell of a drug and will make you absolutely hit someone hard if you manage to pop off on the turn that this is active. So you logically are going to wait until you actually have a lot of crit stars and a lot of cards, and thus you can do really, really solid damage with him. But the issue at play here with Li Shuwen that I've pointed out before is he's sort of a one and done unit. As you guys start looking through here, his skill cooldowns aren't bad. The issue is primarily that everything is 1 turn. So his second skill here is his hard survivability with his crit star absorption and the ability to gain crit stars. Definitely nice, especially since assassins tend to be so crit centric. The fact that he's going to be able to soak the stars himself as an arts unit, also nice, because that means he might get the stars on those arts cards that maybe are buffed by other supports, but also just in general going to help him get back to another noble phantasm, which he's gonna need since he doesn't really have charge or anything in his kit. His third skill here is the increase on attack for 1 turn by up to 30%, and then further increase on attack by 20% for 3 turns. So it's basically a 50% steroid right there, at least for the 1 turn. This is the only real aspect of his kit that goes into multiple turns, which at least he gets something in that regard. And then he gets self debuff immunity for 1 turn, which is another really nice one, because that means nobody's gonna be able to stop him from trying to do what he wants to do unless they like to use buff removal or something on him. And then as we start looking at his NP, he has already had his NP interlude. Actually, I don't know if he's had it on an A, but if he doesn't, he'll have it really shortly here. But still, again, this actually makes Li Shuwen one of the hardest hitting single target assassins. What Li Shuwen doesn't have is a lot of 3-turn buff durations, and what Li Shuwen doesn't have is charge in his kit. But he more than makes up for that with, again, just being arts synergistic and having, again, the ability to hit really hard. So the fact that that is a deal here is really nice for him. But as we look to his NP, it's only 1 hit, so you're not going to get a lot of like loopability, a lot of refund out of that singular hit. He'll deal damage to 1 enemy and has a 150% chance to instant kill them. Just remember, while this is a high instant kill chance, the chance of this happening against a servant or a gold tier enemy is very low still. So there's no guarantee that this is going to land. Be very careful with that if you're a new player and you're looking at this thinking it's super powerful. The issue at play is typically that it's a factor that's multiplied into a formula against a very small decimal amount, and that's why this makes this very unlikely to occur. You could basically try to kill the same servant enemy 100 times and never see it proc, so that is an issue that can happen. But he's also going to reduce the enemy's defense for 3 turns, activating first by 20%. So that is another nice thing for him. Not only because it's going to make his NP hit hard, but it's also going to make follow-up carding hit hard against him. So a lot of how Li Shuwen's going to get used is you're going to try to find a turn where he's got a lot of those stars, maybe, you know, 2 of his cards there. You're going to try to pair with a Noble Phantasm, pop everything, go, try to hit hard, maybe get back to another Noble Phantasm, but at least card hard on the back end of it. And that is why Li Shuwen is still a really solid choice. Again, I like that art synergy in his kit, even though there's not a lot of people I think that really give him his due diligence. Now we're going to go on to the Berserkers here. And first up here, we've got Vlad. Vlad's an interesting one. When we were doing the banner review earlier this year, I was talking to people about how Vlad often gets sort of an unfair criticism of him. A lot of this has to do with the fact that Vlad for years had been sort of gimped, and like we were just talking about with Jack, with the scaling of his Noble Phantasm, Vlad started out bad. Vlad started out with the AoE modifier. It was not good. And then he finally gets a Noble Phantasm interlude that increased it back to normal single target numbers. So after an NP interlude, instead of being where he should be like at an increased value, the NP interlude brought him back to normal. And then Vlad is one of our first units to get his second NP interlude ever, and that actually made him like a normal NP interluded unit. So Vlad is good now, and a lot of people still have that old stigma of thinking that he's bad. In fact, a lot of this came to a head where during this year, as you guys will see, Galatea comes out during Akihabara, and that sort of prompted a lot of comparisons to Vlad. Galatea is also permanent, just like Vlad is. Vlad is going to be your single target arts berserker, but that's reducing him too much. Vlad does a lot of good stuff. One, he's a vampire, and vampires can drain and charge themselves. So vampires can drain the enemy and charge themselves, but that drain also means that you're stalling the enemy. And so a lot of the old school comps with Vlad actually used both Tamamo and Waver, who also drain. And you actually had this weird synergy where they were able to loop their Noble Phantasms, deprive the enemy of their Noble Phantasm, and Vlad, being a berserker, was definitely going to be effective against whatever you were facing. Nowadays, not always going to be the case, but still, Vlad is still a very solid unit in situations like that, where you just go, man, I don't know what to do with this scenario. I'm facing multiple classes, or I maybe just need a hard-hitting single target, and I don't have the right class for it. Vlad's your man, and he has definitely come a long way, and he will have these upgrades as of this year on an A that it's really going to help him out. So again, you start looking at his kit here, and he gets a 30% charge off of Bloodsucker. He's one of the only vampires that actually gets 30% charge off of this. Most other ones get a scuffed like 27.5% charge at max rank. Vlad gets 30% because he's the OG, so that definitely works for him in that regard. The second skill also got an upgrade that increases the defense and attack for 3 turns by 30% each. So again, is a little bit tanky, at least for a berserker, and does have the steroid up there. And his third skill here was originally just battle continuation. It was a decent guts of 1 time 5 turns, which is a long time period of coverage. But then they saw the buffs that they gave to someone like Herc, and they actually end up revisiting this and going, hey, you know what? I'm going to give him stackable guts. And then on top of that, a second guts. This actually, you guys got to see this with Kirei, who just came out recently on JP, where there's, oh man, there's a second guts here. Kirei's is chance based, but Vlad's isn't. Vlad just gets a second guts because, hey, he's a vampire. He's not supposed to be easy to kill, right? So basically he gets 1 guts that's 1 time 1 turn, 1 guts that's 1 time 5 turns. So basically you can delay popping until you have to, but then boom. And because he's a berserker, everyone's going to be effective against him as well. So this is really a nice thing for him to have. It basically gives him 2 get out of jail free cards. And then on top of that, this is also going to be his NP generation skill of 30%. It's going to help him loop. What's that loop you said? Yeah, I loop as a single target arts berserker. So as you start looking at his NP here, again, we're going to look at only the fully upgraded version. It is a 10 hit single target arts NP. That's pretty solid. He deals damage to 1 enemy, then further reduces their arts resistance by 20% after the damage goes out for 3 turns. So it won't affect the NP itself, but if you were to MP again the next turn it would, or if you were to card after the NP it would. So that's really nice. And remember, arts down not only is going to increase arts damage, but it's also going to increase refund. So that's nice. And then he's also got a nice crit star bomb there of 20 stars. A lot of people looked at him, compared him against Galatea, and found him lacking, but the reality was Galatea had a very weird kit. And so when Vlad started immediately afterwards getting the buffs, all of a sudden Vlad just got propelled beyond Galatea a little bit. They're still both great units, but they actually ended up having to revisit Galatea and buff her as well because of this aspect. Because they basically had this new unit that all of a sudden had just gotten immediately outclassed by the old unit. So it was kind of funny to see everyone dogging Vlad, but then Vlad became, you know, the man again. And it was kind of funny to watch it just immediately flip back out. So again, Vlad is actually one of the better units you guys can take here. He's not necessarily going to be a quick and easy solution for you. You're going to have to invest a lot in him, but he is a berserker and he is arts and he does loop with the right supports. So he is solid as far as choices go. All right, so next up, we're going to be talking about Ku Berserker. And Ku Berserker is another really good unit, I think, for challenge content. A lot of people kind of maybe gloss him over in favor of looking at a unit like Hercules. But honestly, while Hercules has kind of become insane with his stackable guts, Ku is definitely nothing to sneeze at this point. He is just like his Lancer form, what we like to call a cockroach. He's a unit that basically doesn't die easily. And on top of that, he's received at least 1 damage upgrade that is really going to help him out in the long run. He's still got that triple buster deck that you see a lot of berserkers have. I mean, we just went over Vlad, but he's not one of the ones that does. He's a rarity in that sense. Most of them have this that also kind of just makes them that it's what we call the gorilla style deck, because it's 3 buster decks and it just makes them an Oonga Boonga gorilla. But Ku actually has a very nice kit here. And if you look at his first skill here, it's going to not only reduce the enemy's attack, but it's also going to reduce their chance to crit for 3 turns by up to 50%. And this is a fairly strong ability that will sort of negate a lot of enemies because of the way that critting with NPCs works, ability to crit outright. This could be a really good thing for a berserker when they actually do get hit. Thankfully, Ku's not going to get hit that much. And that boils down to basically his second skill here, where he gets the protection from arrows C for self-evasion of 2 attacks and defense of 14% up. So again, this is all on a low cooldown of 5 turns. So you pop it preemptively, and then if he gets targeted, he does. But ultimately, you can just sit there and, you know, maybe he doesn't get attacked and you get to wait it out, and it actually ends up coming back, and you just have the cooldown sitting there ready for when it does finally get worn off. The thing to note here is it's 2 attacks. It's not 2 attacks, 3 turns. There's no duration. this will last until he gets attacked twice. So using him in a solo, he's still very survivable and tanky, but putting this on him in a party also just means that he might not get targeted for a long time. You might be able to subsist for multiple turns on end with that up. And you get to his third skill here, one that I think in the future probably will get visited, but for right now it's still just a standard battle continuation of 1 time 5 turns. It's longer than the 3-turn duration, which is obviously good, but it's only the 2500 HP, which is, you know, all right. It's not the best, it's not the worst. Again, looking at his NP here, and like I said, this is the thing that actually got upgraded with him. It now removes an enemy's defensive buffs first, so there's no gonna be, you know, trying to use invuln or defense or evasion or solemn defense from Castoria. None of that will work against Ku. He will just remove it before the damage ever goes out. What will work against him is actually guts or irremovable buffs due to the fact that of it being a challenge quest. That still is a really nice thing to have. And not only that, but he basically again got the standard damage upgrade here, moving up to 800 for a single target buster unit, and that has made him really strong. On top of that, he has overcharge effects that increases on attack and defense for 1 turn of up to 30%. So any carding he does after his buster NP is going to hit significantly hard. And this means not only are you going to be leading with that really nice buster card for the damage bonus, but it's also going to confer that overcharge effect to those cards. So it's a really nice synergy there, and it's one of the reasons that I think that NP interlude actually just gave him a lot more punching power in the face of some of his other competitors. Quetzalcoatl has often been looked at as a really good backline unit to kind of keep you alive, or a really good solo artist, but with that he also became a good damage dealer outright. So I think if you need a unit like Herc, but you don't have the 4-star ticket hanging around, or you didn't pick up Herc on your initial roll, you've got Quetzalcoatl here as an option for you, and he's a very good one. Looking at the next one here, we've got Xiang Yu, and Xiang Yu has been in a weird spot, I would say, over time. When he first comes out, a lot of people kind of gave him some crap over the fact that he's got a very weird sort of kit. You guys can see he's still got the triple buster deck, and a lot of people were thinking, and maybe wishful thinking at that he would be something like Lancelot Berserker as a sort of 5-star equivalent to him, that he would be this new quick looping Berserker. And when he comes out, he's not. He just doesn't have the NP gain. He's got the triple buster deck like Lancelot, but he just doesn't have anything else to really facilitate, unlike Lancelot with his 3rd skill. So again, he does have good overall hit count, especially with 6 hits on that quick card. The overall issue here is, as you look, he's had to get quite a few buffs over time. So his first skill here was the evasion of 1 turn and critical damage of 1 turn by 50%. That gets upgraded basically to increasing it by 100%, and then also giving him 5,000% star absorption. 5,000 is great. That's actually the amount that a unit like a Berserker, or again maybe an Avenger, would need in order to be able to soak the stars, because they just have naturally such low star weight. But the 100% crit damage is really nice, especially since he is a quick unit. He is going to generate stars for you. So that is a really good upside that they've given him, not only the ability to crit hard, but also the ability to just get stars on him. So it means you don't have to flood the party with stars. You can maybe do more with less, and it's a really nice buff that they gave him. Sadly, when this buff came out, it wasn't what he needed still. People were looking for him to either do more damage or to basically be able to loop. And again, that didn't get addressed with this, so a lot of people didn't think this buff was that good, even though it did help indirectly in the damage department due to him critting. So I think it still was a solid upgrade for him. His second skill is quick and buster up for 3 turns. So he's got that 3-turn coverage of a steroid there, 30% each. Again, that one's also really nice as you start looking towards units like Summer Scotty in the future that are going to double up sort of on that coverage for the quick system. But then he also has even more crit damage for 1 turn here of 50%. So again, Xiang Yu's got 150% already, and we're not even to the 3rd skill. His 3rd skill gives him crit stars every turn. That again is going to be on top of any he might generate from a Noble Phantasm or his quick card. So that is a really nice one, plus the fact that it's going to give him the ignore invincibility for 3 turns. I think the big issue when he came out, though, is while people did like this and people did see this, almost very quickly after that, within 6 months, you basically had Musashi Berserker knocking on the door, who was an arts looper and did still have the 3 turns of ignore invincibility. So a lot of people just felt like he was this sort of subpar unit compared to her, just not being the right card type and not really having enough refund to really hold his own. But again, you guys can see now he's got the 5-hit AoE quick NP. Obviously, this is where he's primarily gimped. A lot of people would point to the NP gain rate, but to me, you start comparing him to other quick loopers like Lancelot, like Dante's and stuff like that. They tend to have more hits than this, or they tend to have some sort of ability in their kit to naturally grant them more noble phantasm. All he really has is that 30% quick up, and that's it. So then as you look towards the actual damage here, he's just going to deal damage and then increase his own NP damage for 1 turn by 20%. Can scale with Oberon, and bringing up Oberon is a good point here, because this overcharge effect and its scalability with Oberon is honestly a nice factor to have. You're going to want to run Oberon with Xiang Yu into the future, because that's where he's going to have enough. His refund isn't that good. Yes, you can throw Triple Scotty in there and it can make some looping possible for him now into the future, but Oberon's going to be the first taste of that really being possible. So for UNA people, when you get this SSR ticket finally, Oberon should be either right around the corner or already out. That's where you'll again have the opportunity to finally be able to 3-turn with Xiang Yu. So Xiang Yu in the past has not been very well received and mostly relegated to crit comps with his invincibility pierce. Now he can actually still be a farmer for you, thanks to Oberon coming into the scene and providing that much more charge. So that does change the perspective on Xiang Yu a lot, but still, he has kind of lagged behind some of the more better dealing damage equivalents, and honestly, in a lot of other ways, you could maybe still call him clunky compared to some of his other competitors that maybe just work a little bit easier or with a much more logical solution. So it is what it is, but I do think Xiang Yu can be a good unit for you now, and maybe not one that you should ignore if you need a quality AoE here. Looking at your last one, it's Nightingale Berserker, and Nightingale is honestly never quite been meta. She's had some really up and down time periods here where she's got some good stuff in her kit. She's had some sort of niche uses, but the problem I think overall, and sort of the final nail in the coffin as I'll like to call it, she's not dead, but you kind of gotta stretch to find uses for her at this point. And that final nail basically comes when Castoria came into the game. Castoria hurt units like Nightingale, like Iris Veil, you know, units that maybe were reactionary or trying to reduce damage, because Castoria basically shows up, has solemn defense, and just outright prevents damage. And again, in a game like this, you don't want to run the risk of, well, I reduced the damage, but then the boss showed up and like started to crit me after. Instead, it's better to just say, oh, I took no damage. That way I have even more health to work with. So that's kind of where Castoria comes in and why she has basically changed the game for a lot of these types of units. But like I said, she was never really quite meta even before that. I think Nightingale's prime was actually pre-Merlin year 1. You didn't have a lot of units that were good at necessarily buffing Buster. You basically had like Shakespeare out there, and then again, you know, some other units that could buff it a little bit. Merlin comes along and he's got that 50% Buster up, just like Nightingale does as of her 3rd skill. So this aspect of her kit is still solid. You don't have to worry about that, and as just a Buster stat stick, she's still okay. I think the issue is when you start looking at her other uses and intentions, where you start going, okay, she's supposed to kind of be this unit that is a pseudo support as a Berserker, and Berserker's a really weird class to be a support in, because you're just naturally squishy, and that's already an issue for supports. So as you look at this here, she gets a heal up of 4,000 on a 5-turn cooldown. That's not bad. That's actually a very strong heal. She also gets debuff immunity 3 times 3 turns. This is also probably one of her best intended uses nowadays, that she can give a target debuff immunity for multiple times over multiple turn durations. In fact, one of the uses of her for a while prior to Saber Karna coming out was actually you could use her on units that maybe stun themselves, like Fran Berserker, and it would allow Fran Berserker, if you had the right setup with a super scope with double Scotty to actually be able to loop, and a lot of people didn't even realize that that was possible for Fran Berserker. And Fran was one of those that really had a lot of damage in her kit that, again, maybe people didn't really respect that much. So it actually was a pretty viable solution for some people, but it's still a very niche one where it's like, hey, it works with this one unit. But still, there's times where maybe you're in a challenge environment, you know you're going to be facing debuffs, you can just throw her in there, she'll buff your buster unit, and she'll debuff immunize them. It's not a bad thing. Then also, the insta-kill immunity is not bad either. I think the issue is just that it's the one time over 3 turns where, honestly, most of the time you don't need insta-kill immunity, but when you do, you probably really need it because it's probably against a boss that's spamming it. So one time, it's better than nothing, but it might not save you in the grand scheme of things. Then we get to her second skill, and this is, I think, one that she maybe needs to be revisited on a little bit here. She increases her own damage and defense against humanoids. Honestly, they could help this by making it party-wide. So that way she would be providing buffs to everybody where they have defense against humanoids and damage against humanoids. Humanoid is a very wide niche. Just about everything in the game is humanoid. So it's a really, really nice one to have. But I think the issue at play here is that, one, if this isn't up, she's probably getting her shit kicked in. 2, if the enemy somehow isn't humanoid, she's still getting her shit kicked in. And 3, irregardless, the enemy is effective against her since she's a berserker. So you're not going to have any real protection here. This is a very soft protection. It can work, but it's probably just going to be delaying the inevitable if she's really getting targeted and focused down. So I like this skill, but to me it can be a little bit better, a little bit stronger, especially on the defensive side, especially when we start considering, again, that there's units out there with easily 50% defense, and nowadays even some units that have 100% for themselves in their kit. So I think this could be expanded on for her. Then you look to her NP, and her NP, again, you're going to notice has party-wide cleanse. This is another overlap that she's going to have with a unit like Castoria. It's not a bad thing. Honestly, I'd rather have party-wide cleanse than not. So I think this is still a good aspect, just it is something else that Castoria can do. She's also going to heal the party's HP, and that's what scales up with her NP levels over time. So it's a base of 3,000 all the way up to 5,000, which could be really strong. But then she's also going to reduce all enemies NP damage for 1 turn by 50%. This is how a lot of people were using her back in the day. It was essentially like a sort of higher rarity version of Asterios, where you could basically say, well, maybe I can't stall you. Maybe I can't prevent you from getting to your NP. Maybe I can't block your NP for whatever reason. Maybe you've got invuln pierce or something. And this is all pre-Castoria. But maybe if that's the case, maybe at least I can manage to, you know, reduce your overall NP damage to the point that you can't kill me with it. And then because of the fact that I'm healing both here and with one of my skills, I might be able to keep the party alive and going long enough while you're just sitting there unable to deal a lot of damage. So that was sort of her intended use, but like we talked about, you know, you still run that risk of like, hey, this only applies to NP damage, not the servant or not the enemy's overall attack. So what happens then if the enemy just turns around and goes, okay, I didn't kill you with the NP, but I just start critting you to death? That's not good. And she's already pretty squishy as a berserker in that regard. So I think this is what's made her sort of a really weird unit, kind of like Osakabehime over time, where she has the makings to be good. They've never quite capitalized on it, and I'm not sure the devs quite know what to do with her on it. So unless she's just sort of the missing link for your account, I probably wouldn't go after her. There's many better supports that you can take. But I do hope that they revisit her at some point, because I think she does still have some usefulness if they actually improve her kit. Honestly, one of the big issues that I think I have with her too here is you can see the weird NP gain rate, her natural 0.771, but then an even lower one with her 6-hit quick card, because for some reason they feared her being able to get to her NP too fast. Honestly, to me, it needs improvement. She needs to have the ability to get to her NP even faster, not for the damage reduction gimmick, but more because if she's to fulfill that role as a healer, she needs to be able to get to it regularly and quickly. Again, you shouldn't probably be going longer than like 3 turns without getting to the NP, and that becomes a little bit of an issue when you look at the deck and the fact that she's got still double buster, so she doesn't really have the capability other than on the back end of her NP or with someone else's cards to get triple arts going. So again, I think a third arts card here would have really helped it out, but it is what it is. And now that's it for the Berserkers. Let's start talking about the extra classes. And I think it would behoove me to state that my philosophy on extra classes in FGO is that they're not the main classes. You don't regularly encounter them. As such, having them and having their counters is more of a luxury. It's definitely nice to have them. It's definitely not required in most situations. We started to maybe see the devs changing this philosophy a little bit as they move forward. We started to see, especially in 90++ content on JP, more uses of the extra classes. But it's still not really enough. We don't see it very pervasively. So until they really up it and it becomes commonplace, I'm still going to kind of hold this opinion of the luxury sort of assignment to them. So they can be very good for you. They can actually really help you, but they don't necessarily need to be a unit that you need to target. So let's start out by talking about our only ruler here. And ruler's a really nice class because ruler is one of those that actually basically reduces all the incoming damage. So unless you're an Avenger or a Berserker, you are dealing less damage basically to Jeanne. Actually, that's not true. There are the extra classes that actually deal neutral damage to rulers, but regardless of that, still, Jeanne is a very tanky unit as a ruler, especially with how much health she has. There was a time period where she actually had the most health in the game for a long time. Now she's been passed, but only barely. So she's still a really, really survivable unit. She's also got the triple arts deck here, and I think that's good. And you would look at the 0.76 and think, oh, that's not a bad rate. But I think the issue is primarily the 2-hit arts card here. So one of the issues with Jeanne is that a lot of her survivability, a lot of her protection comes from her noble phantasm. And she, like a lot of other units nowadays, I think takes a little bit too long, just like we were talking about with Nightingale, where I kind of want to see this sped up. I want to see her get maybe like charge per turn or arts up or some kind of NP gain up to really help her get back to that NP faster. I think that has been my issue using her over time, even in the Castoria era, is she spends a little bit too long trying to get to that NP. But I digress. She's still a good unit, especially if they can tend to some of her issues. So her first skill is an unupgraded Revelation A. A lot of people will compare her to someone like Amakusa, who has basically gotten buffs across the board. His Revelation has been upgraded, hers hasn't. She gets the 3 turns of crit stars. It's only 9 per turn. Still not bad, better than nothing. But ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, there's no guarantee that she soaks said stars, and you might need even more if you really want to secure crits with her. So still good to have, but I think this is definitely a skill that could use improvement. Still, it's not going to be chief on my list. As we look to the second skill here, it's important to look at the history of this skill. The skill used to only reduce one enemy servant's NP damage for 1 turn. The issue primarily with this is there were plenty of scenarios where you could run into in a challenge environment where you needed this because all of a sudden you didn't have Jeanne's NP ready. The issue was you might not be facing a servant. And if that was the case, all of a sudden you didn't get any usability out of it. You didn't get any protection out of it. And then basically the enemy would just hit you as hard as it could. Even then, if you could apply, it's only the 30%. It is still possible that an enemy, if it had a strong enough NP, could kill you through it. So what they end up doing is they actually end up upgrading it, and it's still the 30% here, but now it's all enemies. It's any one enemy you can reduce its NP damage. It doesn't matter if it's a servant or not. It will apply regardless. It has a chance to reduce their defense for 1 turn by 20%, and then further reduce their defense for 3 turns by 30%. So again, for 1 turn, you basically has 50% defense down against the enemy. And then for the next 2 turns after that, 30%. I think that's strong. I think this helps. I think one of the biggest issues with taking Jeanne versus, say, a Castoria is both can protect the party with their NP. But when you look at a unit like Jeanne is decidedly a more defensive unit. But that's weird because in some ways, Castoria might be more defensive than her. But the upside for Castoria was that Castoria has charge and far more offensive boosting capability. So I think the issue was primarily that, yeah, you could take one or the other, but basically it was always to your benefit instead to just take Castoria because she sped the team comp up. So it made the fight go by faster. Maybe it was supposed to be a 50-turn fight. Now it's only, 35 turns. Versus with Jeanne, it's a 50-turn fight. You're probably going to take that Castoria just to shave the extra 20 minutes off of that run that you might need. Again, I think that was one of the issues that gets addressed here, and so it's why I like this buff. they basically said, hey, look, we're going to give Jeanne more offensive support basically by allowing her to debuff the enemies, which is going to help your primary damage dealer in the party with Jeanne pop off harder. So this is a good thing. This speeds up the time of Jeanne comps in your overall system, and I like that for it. Again, as you look to the third skill here, this is another one that drastically needs the buff. I think it needs it more than the first skill, because just like the second skill, this one is a chance to bind enemies. It's like stun. It's a very similar buff, or debuff rather, but it only applies to servants. Again, that's the issue. If you're not facing a servant, all of a sudden this skill is useless. Even then, a lot of people would look to this and be like, wow, why does it scale beyond 100%? The answer to that is because, again, you have units that have magic resistance, and they could still, even if you're at 100%, resist. So having 120 is really nice. This is definitely going to make it very likely to land unless a unit's got pretty insane magic resistance. But the issue at play here is, again, going to be the fact that it's just not necessarily going to be a servant that you're facing, and so it might prove to be totally unuseful. So at least two of the skills in Jeanne's deck were designed around it being you facing a servant. If you weren't facing a servant, her kit became largely useless, and that was a huge problem. It's nice to see the second skill get an upgrade, but the third skill definitely needs attention now, and sadly we haven't seen another upgrade for a while. Again, her Noble Phantasm has finally had its upgrade, but it's important again to look at the history here. Her Noble Phantasm granted the party invincibility for one turn, increased the party defense for 3 turns, and had a 500% chance to stun herself for 2 turns after the fact. One of those turns was the turn that you impede, so it's basically that turn and then the next turn. But this was really trash. This was really an annoying effect that kind of hampered your ability to use her. Granted, back then we didn't have too many people that could, protect the party with their NP. That was a really, really useful tool, even regardless of the fact that it's stun. But as you start looking towards her upgrade here, you see they not only get rid of the stun, they also add a party-wide cleanse to her. And I think that's great. I think that's amazing. And now is the part where I'm going to tell you, again, this is still overlap with Castoria. So Castoria also has the ability to protect the party for at least one time, but hers can scale by virtue of overcharge to have more attack, or more stacks rather, that it can protect. Jeanne just gets one blanket turn, but because it's not solemn defense, it could be pierced, it could be removed. So that is an issue. Again, Castoria's could be removed too, but you're not quite got as high of a tier of protection, but it is a turn's worth of duration regardless. So in that regard, I do like it, but I think probably the weakest part about this Noble Phantasm is actually the party defense increase for 3 turns. You might be thinking, well, Cad, that doesn't sound like a bad thing. This is what scales with her NP levels. It should be her healing, in my opinion. Her healing actually comes from her overcharge effect down here, where she heals the party for 2 turns, basically 1,000 each. I'd like to see this be more, but sadly it's not. My issue overall with the defense isn't that it's a bad thing to have party-wide defense. It's that at NP1 it's only 5%, and that is fucking useless. That is terrible. That is hardly impactful. Even all the way at NP5, it's only 25%. So again, this is another thing that could really honestly use some tweaking. Jeanne is another unit that actually could use a second NP interlude, because what I would like to see is them revisit this scaling. To me, this should be like base 20 or something like that, all the way up to 50%. This really needs to get revisited, in my opinion. This is really, really bad for how it works. Hilariously enough, it didn't change. That's why she needs it. So it's rare to see something like this where you actually get a unit that gets an NP interlude and the scaling of the NP doesn't change. You see this all the time with damage units where their scaling changes. We have seen it where they scuffed a unit and didn't give them the full scaling. But this is the first time that I can remember where a unit got an upgrade and there was no scaling change at all. It didn't change. They just removed the stun because they realized how bad that was, but they didn't revisit how bad this is. And that's one of the issues with her. So I think Jeanne can still be a really good unit for protecting your party, but she's still gonna pale in comparison to a unit like Castoria in most situations. That being said, it's not mutually exclusive. You can run her with a Castoria, you can run her with a Tamamo, that sort of thing is definitely possible. So regardless of the fact that she may need some work, she is still a really good defensive unit and really good at giving you a protection ability on NP. And there's some advantages to having that on NP versus on a skill. On a skill, you're restricted by the cooldown. On NP, you're only restricted by how fast you can get back to your next NP. So that makes this really good still. But I still want to see some upgrades for Jeanne down the line. Sitonai is another unit that when she first comes out, I think a lot of people had mixed feelings on her. Again, remember, this was pre-Castoria. So basically, you had a lot of people sitting here going like, you know, she's arch, she's low damage. I don't really need her. Buster's kind of meta, Quick's kind of meta. I'm not going to worry about her. But then Castoria comes along, and a lot of people haven't revisited Sitonai since, and you should, because Sitonai with Castoria is really strong. She still can really pop off. She actually has a fairly good NP gain rate too, just naturally here. I think this is one of my considerations, that I would have liked to have seen the third arts card for her, but I digress. It's still a good overall kit. Having an arts single target alter ego is definitely going to be good for your ability to get back to another noble phantasm. So her first skill here is self-invincibility for 1 turn, so she's got that hard defense, but then also a damage cut for the party for 3 attacks, 3 turns of 500. It's not the strongest of damage cuts, but hey, it's basically for free and it's for the entire party, so nice little bit of support there. Her second skill here increases her own arts performance for 3 turns by up to 30%. So nice steroid there to allow for that sort of loop ability. But then it's also going to give her debuff immunity 1 time 3 turns. I will never get angry at having debuff immunity, regardless of how many times it is, because that can be absolutely clutch in the right situation. And then her third skill here has a chance to increase her own attack by 20% for 3 turns. So you don't scale the attack amount. What scales here is the chance. This to me is where Sitonai could use an upgrade, because we've started to see this with some of the other RNG units where they're just getting buff success chance in their kit at this point, because I think Lasingle has realized it's just an annoying gimmick that pisses people off. Ironically enough, they still release units with RNG gimmicks like Ruler Da Vinci that just perplexes me at this point in time, because it's like, when it becomes that RNG, you can't count on it. 80% still pretty good odds. It's just you're going to be really annoyed in that 1 out of every 5 times that this doesn't proc. And then also a chance to gain 10 crit stars every turn for 3 turns. But what does scale again, and the reason you're still going to lure this skill, is you're going to want the NP charge here. So it's a 30% NP charge. Again, that's going to give her that nice synergy with the append like we talked about, where you could pop this skill turn 1 and basically just have the 3 turns of attack up. You hope you have the success on the proc, but otherwise, again, not bad to have. As you start to look at her noble phantasm here, it's a 6-hit single target NP. That's, again, not too shabby. She's going to deal damage to one enemy, and then if they're a dragon, this is another little known aspect of Sitonai they don't hear people talk about too often, but it's going to drain you if you're a dragon. So ironically enough, that can actually be a little bit her use. Anyone with the dragon trait, Sitonai can potentially lock down by looping against them over and over and over again and kind of just depriving them of that NP. Then her overcharge effect is going to apply after damage, so not before, but still reduce their defense for 3 turns by 20% and their critical attack chance by 3 turns by another 20%. So it's going to lower the odds of a unit critting you. It's also going to mean that any follow-up attacks after the NP or any subsequent NPs on the following 3 turns are going to deal more damage. And that's honestly nice. And this could be stacking again as you're looping. So I do like it. I think Sitonai is a pretty undervalued unit at this point. And part of the reason for that is a lot of people will look to Melt, look at that really insane crit buff that she's gotten, as well as her ability to remove buffs. And that is strong for Melt. I'm not going to deny that. But I think, honestly, Sitonai can still be a good tool for you if you need a unit like this, especially if you don't like your prospects of rolling Melt at certain points of the game. Maybe just the banners aren't lining up for you. Again, Melt can definitely be really good for you. And honestly, alter egos can fill that niche still as sort of like the pseudo single target for any of your cavalry classes here. They can basically be like, hey, maybe I don't have a good single target assassin. Maybe I can use Sitonai instead. Maybe I don't have a good single target caster. Maybe I can use Sitonai instead. So you can definitely use that to cover your bases. It's not as much damage as having the actual effective class, because alter egos are only 1.5 times effective, but it's still better than nothing. It's still decently good, and they're only going to take neutral damage from those cavalry units as well. And then we're going to get to our last unit here, and that's going to be Jinako. So Jinako, I think, has been an interesting unit for me. I've had people ask me kind of what her purpose is over time, and to me, Jinako screamed one thing when she first came out, and that's that she's permanent. To me, that was ultimately their goal, is they wanted to put a permanently available moon cancer in the game. Because I think what they found over time, especially before a lot of the adjustments to the support lists, before you had welfare BB and stuff showing up, I think they looked at that and they went like, man, you know, we do occasionally have Avenger fights in the story and stuff like that, and people just don't have a moon cancer up on their supports for anyone to take. And because BB for a long time was the only moon cancer, and then BB Summer comes around, who is a limited summer unit, people just didn't have easy access to moon cancers. So I think that was their goal ultimately with Jinako. So regardless of looking at Jinako's overall performance, the one thing you can always say about her is she's permanent. She's always there. You could definitely take her with this ticket, or you can just wait and hope that she spooks you at some point. But I think this becomes a harder sell now as we start looking towards main interludes, and as we start looking to the fact that, yes, you can actually just get a BB if you need a moon cancer at this point. It might take you a little bit of investment, but that's why I'm probably not going to advise you to take Jinako on the ticket here, because if that's your only goal, then there you go. You had a solution to that problem. Now, looking at her kit here, she does have the triple arts deck, and Jinako, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that as far as raw stats go, Jinako actually has the highest HP in the game. You have other units like King Protea that can surpass her with her buffs. You have other units like Buntoria and Janu, who can basically both surpass her in the fact that they might have a little bit less HP, but they have far more effective HP given the fact that they're rulers and typically take half damage from a target. So again, it just depends, but still, that's a lot of HP, and that's nothing to sneeze at. Sometimes being able to take a good licking can be a good asset to you. Her first skill here is her party-wide charge of 20%. Her second effect on this is the party-wide attack for 3 turns of an additional 20%. And then she gets 5 crit stars per turn every turn for 3 turns. That is a stacking crit star per turn buff for 3 turns, which is definitely going to result in some really good stars. I think that's probably one of the better aspects to her kit. Her second skill is going to be the ability to taunt for 1 turn, and then the ability to reduce her own damage taken, so a 1000 damage cut. Not bad. And then also increase her attack by 30%. So just looking off the first and the second skill there, you guys can see she basically has 50% attack up in her steroids there. Her third skill here is the one that's actually gotten the upgrade, and it used to be grants one ally invincibility for 1 turn, increase their NP generation rate by up to 30%, and then sealing their skills for 1 turn. A lot of people look at that and be like, oh god, that's kind of a nasty demerit. You're fine as long as you've popped every other skill that you would need to pop prior in the turn. So it's only the 1 turn. It's only going to last till, you know, again, the end of that turn. So you're fine. Just pop the skill last and it just does basically nothing to you. But it ended up getting upgraded, and I did like the upgrade that they gave her, because they basically come back, they revisit this, and they give her 3 turns of NP damage of 30%. That's strong, honestly. And then on top of that, they also gave her an anti-lawful alignment power mod for 3 turns of 50%. So in the right set of circumstances, your Jinako can deal decent damage now. I think a lot of people looked to Jinako and said one of the biggest knocks against her is that her damage was crap. And I don't say that lightly. It was by far the worst of all the moon cancers, not even close to the other ones. But with this buff, this definitely helped bring her at least more in line. She's not going to be your top dog, but she is going to be a unit that still can be effective for you if you needed a moon cancer in the situation. So I think this definitely helps her, especially if you're going up against a single enemy when Jinako's AoE. So I do like it. I think this was a good change for her, and I think that they kind of addressed the #1 issue that she had with this, which was damage. Looking at her NP here, it's a 3-hit AoE NP that reduces all enemies' defense for 3 turns by 30%, activating first. So you start looking at all these steroids and you start thinking like, man, how is she not doing good damage? This is why I say the tale is always to look at the entire kit here, because she's a 5-star with sub 10,000 attack. That's really bad. So that's why she wasn't dealing a lot of damage despite all of those steroids. And again, it's why I thought it was definitely something that needed to be addressed. Then she deals all damage to enemies, and then she grants herself invincibility for 1 turn. You might be thinking, well, didn't she already have invincibility in her kit? And the answer was yes, but it's a targeted one. So she has taunt, invincibility, and targeted invincibility. And that's where, again, she was a decently good stall unit. Okay, I think the bigger issue at play here is that this isn't party wide. None of her invulns are party wide. So I had seen people sort of likening her to kind of like QSH, a very valuable like extra class for sort of soloing or maybe even sticking into a party and kind of protecting, since she also had the taunt. The issue here though is that she doesn't give any sort of party wide protection, so she's better on an island on her own. But then if you're going to look at her from that perspective, QSH is just better, because not only is he a ruler, but he also just flat out has kind of the better kit built for that. So kind of what I saw when I looked at Jinako at first, and regardless of the damage issue, I kind of just saw that when she comes out, she's kind of this jack of all trades, but not really. But she's definitely not a master of any of them. In fact, in any one of the points in which you look at her and you try to single out a part of her kit, there's probably someone that does that better amongst the extra classes. So really, it's more just the product of everything together that makes her a decent unit. But yeah, that kind of became an issue where it's like, hey, I don't need to take her. I probably have a better unit in my arsenal that works. So I definitely like the fact that they've addressed it. I think they could still tweak her a little bit, because her kit is not bad. It's still very survivable and strong, but I think that was kind of the ultimate issue, is there was no, hey, this is when I take Jinako time. I think giving her the lawful niche helped that. That gave you that this is when I take Jinako moment. And then again, at the end of all of this, she's also going to heal her own HP. So again, it's kind of my issue here is everything here is selfish. It's only herself. It's not, hey, I heal the party. So that could be a really, really useful tool for her, especially as someone that is AoE with their Noble Phantasm. I think that could have helped her out a lot if they had, instead of going the selfish route, gone the, you know, party-wide route. I think she'd be a much more valuable unit, even looked at as a like support unit, especially for challenge content. But sadly, they didn't do that, so it is what it is. Again, I think overall, you definitely don't have to have any of these 3 units, but there could be scenarios where maybe you don't have them and you're just collecting them for, you know, collection's sake, or maybe you just go, hey, I don't have a unit of that class. I would really like to, you know, try and actually fill that void and have a unit that I can take to those fights. So I do still like these units, but they're maybe not the first choice by any means. Okay, so just in summary now, remember, you guys are going to get this SSR ticket. You're going to be able to pick 1 unit from this. My overarching suggestion is that primarily you're going to probably want to look at your support casters first, especially if you're a newer player. As long as you're content with what you have there, maybe you don't have these units, but you have adequate replacements, or maybe you just don't want these. Then you can start looking to other units, and the other units that I would primarily focus on, and it's going to depend on your needs, but I think there's some really good value out of Ozzy, because not only do you get the buff success chance, but you get the single target hard hitting rider that you know is going to get upgrades this year. You've got the single target caster that can be hard to get your hands on here with Sanzang, that still is a really good kit for the party. You've got, again, loop ability and sort of wide capability to work against just about anything in the game with Vlad. So that's one of the reasons I really like him. And then you've got overarching survivability with Alter. On top of that, you've got Enkidu, who's another really strong challenge unit. So those last kind of 3 were good at single target for challenge scenarios and maybe just hitting really hard. Everybody else here can either be a potentially good farmer, or again, just maybe be that really good unit that you like. Up to you to determine what you want there, but I would try to fill any voids in your account. I would try to go after new stuff first, or maybe try to take a unit that you know is good in quality already on this list and expand their noble phantasm level. You can do that, but I would at least try to tell you make sure the voids are filled before that. Also, if you're worried about not having enough materials for the unit of choice, you definitely want to try and maybe use your pure prisms to get them online faster. If you're a new player, you'll also have that special ascension that takes them up through their max ascension. So for these SSRs, that means it takes the unit to level 80 right through the ascension. It doesn't take them to the max level, it just takes them through the max ascension. But still, that can be really valuable. That can also save you a lot of resources. So definitely look to pure prisms, definitely look to the special ascension to help get you one of these units online faster. But again, it's up to you, and especially if you're a new player, I can definitely advise you on a gameplay standpoint, but remember, nothing's going to make you enjoy the game more than having your favorite unit. So ultimately, that needs to be your biggest consideration. Is there a unit here that you absolutely love and cannot go without? As long as you're good on that requirement, start looking towards those gameplay needs. But again, I hope this was helpful to you guys. We'll see you for the next video. I'm gonna give my voice a rest. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.